And I would walk 500 miles, and I would walk 500 more, just to be the man who walked 1,000 miles to fall down at your door. Hello, everyone. Ooh, that's weird. Okay. Boom. Hello. And we're back. Yes, today is the 31st of March. Today is 1939, Destroyer Doctrine of the combatant navies. What was it and where did it come from? Now, this is a rather interesting thing because, honestly, as I try and explain to students on a regular basis, there is published doctrine, and there is what they do on operations, and there is the inferred doctrine one can draw from stuff like how they build the ships they use. You do sometimes have to combine the whole set to try and figure it out exactly what they're doing and exactly how this is going to sound strange, how off the mark their professed doctrine is from the reality. Because one of the things you always have to realize about published doctrine is it's only in part written for the actual naval service. Published doctrine is often an outward-facing document. It is very much something which is often written out by people who are retired, so it can be out of date that way, but usually it's written for the civilian audience, if not the very specific audience of those people who will have an impact on the treasury to justify procuring ships. So, it can be fun. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, John Shea. Hello, the Messiah Athletic. Hello, John Shea. Interpretation 1939 Destroyer Doctrine before the UK. Before the live. UK, get me closer. I want to hit them with my sword. Closer than you think. US, long range and move or fast gun. Canada, with US, UK plays Imperial March. Torpedo spamming, Italy. High speed and excellent maneuverability, France. Jeremy Clarkson, USSR. That's classified, comrade. Germany. Hello, my U-boat brethren. May I join you? Potentially. Hello, everyone. Wonder if the doc has checked his meter given the hour. Given tomorrow. Considering it's the 1st of April, I will hope things will be fine. Let's see. Polish doctrine. In a destroyer engagement, handgun ammo must be spent. Okay. Want to bet Night Secretary? Want to bet the trials will be appearing? Oh, they will be. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Rowan Cash. Ooh. Main Borean, hello. Could have been. I love the chat. And 35 amendments. Greetings, everyone. I'm going to just float around in here like a mine in the Black Sea. Oh, please not. Those things keep blowing up in random places. Oh, I feel for the doc. I really do. 5th time recording this video, mine. Sheesh. Yeah, it can be fun. The long patrol for this I had recorded, but decided I didn't like the version going through it today, so I'm going to re-record it tomorrow when I'm recording tomorrow's video as well, because I also didn't like the version of that. And the video which is going to be doing sort of from 6 o'clock till about 7 on Sunday, just to make sure I get, so you definitely have a video to cover 6 to 7, because I'm driving home. I should be home for 6, but yeah. Hi, James Doss. Hello, HMS Ford. Hello, Jonathan Barrow. Hello, Vic Rosava. Hello, Steve Richards. Hi, VCH. Hide up squad and hiding car. Right, first things first, I'm going to do a quick announcement. So, as you all know, I'm going to see Hydra in June. Woohoo! And other ships. However, currently, what I use for recording and taking videos and picture ships is my phone. And I've managed to put aside a little bit of money. Not much, but a little bit of money. It should be enough. To try and get a decent camcorder sort of thing that will allow me to record better quality video, basically. So the trouble is, I haven't really looked in that area much. So, if you have recommendations for what is a good quality camcorder system, a recording system for YouTube quality videos, preferably for HD quality videos, which is preferably less than £150, but I will stretch up to 200. Please, can you don't put in the chat, because I can never get links out of the chat. It never works for me for some reason. But if you can put a link down below in the comments, that'd be really appreciated, because it would be really helpful. So that's what I'm currently, hunting for, making sure I have a good camera for that trip. Vision, hello, just got back from dentist. Cracked tooth, needs to go. You have my sympathies. I keep being bumped in terms of getting my own tooth removed, and it's kind of strange, because it's not hurting me, touch wood, it's fine, but they keep saying it needs to go. I'm boring. I love the lives. Starts out by saying it's complicated. It's going to be very, very complicated, because also there's my own approach to trying to work out doctrine, and often I use the approach of what are they building, because there's a doctrine that they're aiming for, and there's the pragmatic version of doctrine which they build their ships for, and that can be a very different thing. And also, it's going to sound strange, but you might not have a homogeneous build and doctrine. In fact, you might go, well, we need some ships for one role, we need other ships that can do this role, and other ships that can do that role, but they all need to do some of the other roles as well. And it's how do you balance that mix, and what's that mix going to be made up of, and that all affects, and it comes in quite cool. VCH, for a really good one, you're likely in the £600 range. Ouch! VCH, don't write that stuff in the chat. I've told you before, I have Scottish and Cornish blood. Oh, 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 good lord. That winded me more than a 10k run. Hey, sheesh. I mean, that literally drove the air out of me. You don't do that to a guy. It's not fair. Just quietly reading the chat and then see it. Ah. Very fancy vision. And again, by gum. Inkard, did all navies take a similar approach to the Destroyers? Nope. No, they all went their own ways. Own ways entirely. I guess a destroyed torpedo is a flag that the torpedo magazine has exploded. It's an issue. Go on, Cameron. Doc, I would have a look at the London Camera Exchange for a decent used camera. Again, it's before I started doing that, I need to know what would be a sort of good camera to be looking for. It's going to sound strange, but I have been doing my own research, and all I keep getting is a blizzard of terms. And the thing is, I can take a PC apart, put it back together again, and I understand all the terminology for that. And I know the terminology when it comes to ship design. I know the terminology. I also am honest enough to know when terminology is something I don't have enough of a background in. And I want to make a purchase and be able to familiarize itself before June, which means I don't have the new normal 3 to 6 months to make sure I'm really key with that terminology before I do it. So therefore I'm putting it open to the lovely people on the other side of that camera, on the other side of the screen, and going, please help me. I was like, never tell a Scotsman about it. Scottish, Cornish, we do not like the concept of expensive stuff. Oh, good lord. So, let's start off with, where do we start off with in Destroyer Doctrine? Well, we start off with, before you can have a doctrine, you have to know your mission. Yeah. And guess what? Nations can have, theoretically, you can go for and go, well, they all have to do that mission and have to do that mission. But how important is that mission? Okay? I may be able to give you a 2-hour solid lecture on why strategy by matrix is the most awful thing that has ever happened to defense procurement in the entire history of the universe. And the fact is, it is absolutely terrible, and it just takes all the thinking out of actual real strategy in terms of procurement. And doesn't work, and ends up with a mess we have at the moment, where poor Ajax has been lumbered with so many specifications it was never going to have a chance, and we've got rid of Warrior, but when we actually really needed it, and all the other things, it just that's what you end up with. And don't get me started on the slow pace of programs when it comes to our new frigate procurement. And we don't have enough aircraft yet in service for 2 carriers we've built. You know, all these things, that is down to strategy by matrix. However, risk analysis by matrix is actually a very sensible thing, because you realize you might have the same risk in terms of the headline, but you might not be exposed to it the same amount. For example, America is not as exposed to coastal convoy issues as the UK is. The UK is far more exposed to convoy protection and need to do trade protection than America is. America is a long way away from all its opponents, which has an impact and protection on their coastal trade. It means any threat is likely to be more one-dimensional. And B, the other thing, America doesn't have to import as much when it comes to raw materials. So that affects it. So both Britain and America have to think about convoy protection, but not in the same way. And not to the same extent. So this has an impact on your design. And all of them have an experience of World War I, but those are different experiences. The Italians' World War I experience is mostly the Adriatic with torpedo boats. So, honestly, when you look at their first generation of destroyers coming into the interwar period, and we'll get into this, they look like large torpedo boats, because that is what they are, because that's what the Italians understand and what they think they need. This is the world you are dealing with. It is going to be complicated. It is going to be not an exact science when it comes to doctrine and the history of it. For Britain, you also have its First World War experiences divided between the Harwich Force, who are the gods of destroyers as far as the destroyers are concerned, and the Grand Fleet and the Battlecruiser Fleet. The Battlecruiser Fleet is, according to Beatty, who's the First Lord of the Admiralty for a good part of the interwar years, after the First World War, it was king and was all perfect, and all histories must be written to reflect that. And yet the Grand Fleet is where the bulk of the officers served, and they saw destroyers doing those escort duties, and they thought they were numerous, this, that. But for destroyer forces, it was the Harwich Force, which were the bigger, powerful, meatier destroyers that were really getting into the enemy. That were their key destroyers. And depending on which level of government you were and how you were involved in it, your interpretation of what destroyers and what lessons come out of the First World War have an impact on what you think you should be procuring for your destroyers. Which is one of the reasons why, when you get to the 1930s, you have this fight going on between Henderson, who is from the Grand Fleet and the Harwich Force background, having had a lot to do with the personnel from there, wanting bigger, more powerful destroyers, and Chatfield from the battlecruiser force, who basically think, and who's obsessed with preserving BT's legacy, is basically going, no, we need many small destroyers. We need as many as possible. And then, of course, you have the treaty limitations, so that puts an argument on having the small destroyers, because you can have more of them than you can have the bigger destroyers in terms of numbers of hulls in the water. And if you have to escort a lot of trade around the world, you want hulls in the water. So this is what you're dealing with. This is the complexities of it. So, it's fun. Hi, Dantrum. VCH, can you think of any fleet engagements where the tactical and strategic victory was the deciding factor in overall, yet neither fleet fired a shot? There are a couple, but I can't remember their names off their head. But there were a couple of maneuver engagements, which literally resulted in the enemy fleet going back home. Hi, Enoch. Alzaski, our new IFV BWP Porsche starts full production next year. First stage will run 24. Maybe you reckon that one instead of Ajax? No, I'm CV90. Sorry. I know what I get. In a nice way, if you look at the Ajax production routine, the Ajax is supposed to be 100% on all these criteria. The CV90 is pretty much 90% in production. And the thing about that versus the Borsuk is that the Borsuk, whilst it is very good and it's an interesting design, if it's the one I think it is, the trouble is the CV90 all are, if you consider the northern flank and all those duties we do, which I know the British Army likes to forget that Britain is responsible for the northern flank and keeps trying to focus on the central front. Yeah, the northern flank is where we're responsible for, and that's where the CV90 really shines. But that's off the top of destroyers. But it does kind of fit, because APCs are kind of destroyers. They go everywhere, requiring a mass of numbers. So anyway, I kind of want to know what self-guiding smart torpedoes would have done in World War II. Caused a panic attack. Hello, Loki. Side to go. Constantly US retiring Freedom Class LCS. I'm more upset about the fact they're just not continuing on the Zumwalt. A modified Zumwalt would be the best way to go. Swift is an interesting thing. Hi, Paul Thomas. So, before you can have a doctrine, you must have and know your missions. So, does your fleet have large numbers of capital ships which need escorting, i.e. protecting from air attack, submarines, like combats? If it doesn't, then you don't need to worry about those things. But do you? Does your fleet have aircraft carriers which need escorting? Interesting enough, there's a big change in Japanese destroyer doctrine once they start recognizing they're planning on organizing the Kido Butai. Because if you're going to organize the Kido Butai, then suddenly you want destroyers which can escort your carriers. To an extent, the tribal class are part of the Royal Navy escorting their carriers. And to an extent, they're fast capital ships. And aircraft carriers, well, they need escorting from basically everything, but usually grouped as air attacks, submarines, light combatants, heavy combatants. Pretty much everything on that list is something your carrier needs protecting from. If it gets close, anything gets close to your carrier is dead. So you protect. Then there's, does your fleet have cruisers or coastal defense ships or other major assets should coordinate with? Okay, Norway should be paying attention at this point. Should be. Don't worry, Colby. How much money do you have to spend and how much is your exposure? I.e., are you a maritime trading nation with a huge merchant marine? Most of the islands depend upon integration for national survival. Do you depend upon maritime infrastructure to survive, as railways, roads either do not or cannot exist? And then on top of that, you have treaties. Now, these treaties can be nations are your protectorates. They can be your Commonwealth and Dominion Empire. They can be treaties as in the Washington Naval Treaty and the London Naval Treaties. All these things will have an impact on your missions. When you know your missions, then you can start developing your doctrine. But it starts off with your missions first, not your doctrine. So, you have to start thinking all this through before you can. And this explains how very small differences in mission can lead to massive differences in doctrine. Small differences in mission can lead to massive differences in doctrine. And this is another reason why I say so regularly, what is the best destroyer for the US Navy is not necessarily the best destroyer for the Royal Navy, is not necessarily the best destroyer for the Italian Navy. Because a destroyer which is the out-and-out best destroyer you can build for the US Navy is probably not orientated around the mission set in the order of the mission set the Royal Navy would use. Yes, they can still use that destroyer. Yes, it would still be a very good destroyer of them. It just wouldn't be the best destroyer they could have for their needs. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the US destroyer, because it's built to the US needs. So it's still the best destroyer you could get for the US needs. And that's great. But that doesn't, the point I'm saying is, what is the best doctrine? Well, the best doctrine and the best destroyers are the destroyers which best fit the nations that they are serving's needs. So who are we looking at? The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. It's complicated. France and Russia. Why are it complicated? Because they don't do enough. The France isn't in the war long enough, and Russian destroyers just don't get enough fun for me to really be able to talk about what they can do. They don't get used as you think the destroyers should be used. And then the Allies. I'm going to start off with the Greeks, then the Dutch, then the Norwegians, then Polish, then the United Kingdom, then Australia and Canada, and then the United States. Now, Australia and Canada are sort of off to their sides because they are both using British ships, and in many ways they fit in with British doctrine, but also in other ways the British doctrine is expanded to fit them. So part of British doctrine includes building ships which can fit in for them. And there is a reason for this. And this has an impact on the design of British destroyers because they realize they're building ships which have also got to fit the duties and the national needs of Australia and Canada. It has fun. Hi, Strider. Sorry about no Wi-Fi. Alzaski, going back to topic. If you can maintain large number of destroyers, it's indeed better to have more small units. Lots are easier to replace and less costly. If you can have 3 or 4 only, make them as powerful as you can. Yes and no, because here is the problem, and this is the point which Henderson, etc., was making to Chatfield. Yes, you can have more smaller destroyers. That's true. But the thing is, if they are therefore fatally weak when engaging your enemy's larger destroyers, then you're going to lose a lot of ships. Doesn't matter how many you have. And you can argue that in many ways Henderson was predicting the events of the battles of Narvik. Because if we consider what happens to the H-class, the first pass they do fine, because they have the element of surprise and numbers. Boom, boom, boom. The second pass, once the Germans realize what's going on, they are smashed. They get out there as good as they can, and they do how they handle themselves, equip themselves as best as they can, but they are smashed. And the reason is because they aren't as big. And then later on, in the third battle of Narvik, the tribals turn up and go, come. And that's the problem. You also have to ask, are you going to have your destroyers going up doing any of your cruiser duties? This is something which isn't sort of mentioned here, but does your fleet have cruisers or coastal? Does it have commitments to treaties? Does it need to do presence around the world? All these things can have an impact. If you expect your destroyers to bump up occasionally and do the job above them, they are going to need to be bigger. Incal, following P&O ferry issues, how many UK sailors would be suitable to help with an RN build-up in a few years? Honestly, the RN would probably have to look more to its reserves than to merchant marine. There isn't really enough of a merchant. You see, and also I would point out the merchant marine from Britain is rather officer-heavy. It is very officer-heavy if you look at the British merchant marine. I do have a few good, and I know I have some good some very nice watchers and subscribers to the channel who are in the British Merchant Marine, and I know some of them are even sort of the engine room technicians and those sort of things, but the vast majority of British Merchant Marine are very highly trained, very skilled, but most of them are on these sort of officer levels, which means they are very, very important to keeping the Merchant Marine going, which means the Royal Navy can't really nick them for things. Ryan Cash, I presume there was a tonnage cap on individual destroyers post-warning. What was it, or was there just a tonnage cap on the class? If I get the actual text up for me, I can actually read it to you. I haven't got it out today because honestly, that's something I've been looking at for the treaty limit. I can give another sort of thing where I basically go, aircraft carriers. Capital ships. Washington Treaty limitations on destroyers. Capital ships. Yeah, the Washington Treaty doesn't have much about destroyers. It just limits the size of any vessel, in the case of ships, it's defined as what any ship displacing exceeding 10,000 tons is a capital ship. The word ton in the present treaty, except in expression of metric tons, shall be understood to mean 2,240 pounds, or 1,016 kilos. Yeah, no, it's the London Treaty which gets into destroyers and all those things. Yeah, not the Washington. But once you get into London and Washington treaties, you get 1,800, and you get all sorts of tonnage issues. VCH, one of the serious problems in planning against American doctrine is that Americans do not read their manuals, nor do they feel any obligation to follow the doctrine. Yes, the Royal Navy has a similar approach. It's one of the things which worries people, which is why, again, you do... however, saying this, you can infer doctrine from their ships, and their ships will give you how best to use them. Same Richard, doesn't which body of water you're operating count towards design? Yep, geography has an impact as well. Tanaverka. Hello, Andrew Paul. No need to worry about being late. So the moral here is never send an alphabet utility destroyer to do a fleet destroyer's job. I was asking, for the Battle of Narvik, Warburton Lee was outnumbered 2-1. I'd say outcome being a tie and a mission kill for German. We could call it a success. A costly one, but still a success. How do I put this? You can push it that way, certainly, but I tend to not. Because the thing is, those H-class boats weren't supposed to do that sort of thing. The H-class destroyers were not really for that role. And they were being used for that role because wartime had happened, and because, honestly, the things which were supposed to be coming in the larger destroyers had not shown up quick enough. And there just weren't enough tribals to go around. And honestly, Britain had been waiting on the government to get over the treaties to start building the large destroyers. And if you look at what was planned orders for 1940, 1941, that would have, by 1942, if war had taken to that long, would have probably meant that Britain would have had a very good crop of large destroyers in service. Hello, 96340. They couldn't get agreement for anything small in the capital ships. They did get an agreement that nothing bigger, that no ship was able to be built larger than 10,000 tons at Washington. Otherwise, it would count towards the capital ship tonnage. That's what puts the ceiling in on cruisers. So, these nations are the ones we're going to be covering. And I will say this now. There will be a lot of me saying how brilliant Admiral Sims is at the end of this. So, this is the Kriegsmarine. Destroyer, type 1934, 1934A, 1936, and 1936A. That is pretty much all their own build destroyers. They do freely acquire destroyers from nations which they manage to overrun. They are quite happy and quite proud to do that, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But what they were after is not really what they achieved. Honestly, they have a problem. So, most of them use 5-inch guns, which is fine. The US Navy uses a good 5-inch gun, but the Germans don't really seem to have a quick-firing 5-inch gun. Or rather, it's theoretically quick-firing as long as you're not in anything that's actually moving around. Well, yeah, Knight. I'll say that question for when probably when Australia and Canada come up on the tribals. The Type 1934 especially are an interesting build. In fact, you can tell very easily they are their first destroyers to be built for a while. In fact, honestly, how do I put this politely? So, the fact is, even while the Type 1934 are being built, when the 34A are ordered, they're ordered with improved bows, because even as they're building them, they've realized, as they've done more testing, that the bows they put on the 1934s are not good. They are armed with 5-inch guns, and this is the sort of layout you can see. They have 4 1.5-inch AA guns. 6 220mm AA guns, and 2 quadruple 21-inch torpedo tubes. Plus, they carry 4 depth charges and 6 racks for 60 mines. 6 racks for depth charges and also 6 racking systems for 60 mines. It's quite. If I expand this out, you can see the rail track on it for the mines. Again, this is a product of the German Navy trying to fit everything into these ships. Also, you also have to remember the Germans have the Schnellboats, they have the torpedo button, and they have the Destroyers. But the fact is, they have sort of 3 levels of ship, which all sort of fit into what we would consider your destroyer attack role. Now, these 2 vessels, the small ones, they have a problem. In that, if you pump out these, they're going to take a lot of crew. But honestly, a Schnellboot, as good as it is, and they are very good, are not going to allow you a long-range impact. Torpedo button, again, as good as they are not going to give you more than coastal presence, really. Not in a major war. So everything depends upon these being good escorts, right? The 34, the 34As, the 36 and 36As. They're supposed to be good escorts. There is a problem with that, though. The problem is there are 4 Type 34s built, and they're in service, commissioned by 1937. There are 12 Type 34As built, and they're in commission. The last one, which is, I think, the Erik Kölner, which is sunk at the Battle of Narvik, by March 1939. Okay? There are 6 1936 built, and 5 of them are lost at the Battle of Narvik. This is why we say the Germans get their destroyer force wiped out at the Battle of Narvik. Because you can go through the destroyer force and pretty much almost everything is gone. And then the 36As, and eventually, well, how to put it? The 36Bs and all these ones, they come out during the wartime. They come out during World War II. The 36Cs never enter service. So, this is what we're looking at. The 36As are ordered before war begins. So, they will tell us where the German strategy is heading towards. And the 36As are ultimately the ultimate German destroyer. They are therefore armed with 4 single, or 1 twin and 3 single, 5.9-inch guns. And the 36s? Well, they're armed with 5 single 5-inch guns. The 34As, 5 single 5-inch guns. And the 34s, 5 single 5-inch guns. And honestly, they are building pretty much the same destroyer, but then you realize how many they're building of them. They build 4, and then they build 12, so they got up to 16 destroyers. And then they get up to 22 destroyers. And then you realize just how many of their destroyers are lost at Narvik. And it gets quite disturbing. Okay, you've got 22. You start the war with 22 destroyers. And by the end of the Battle of Narvik, you no longer have. You've lost 3 of your 34s. You have lost another 3 of your 34As, so that's 6. You've lost 5 of your Type 36s, so that's 11. Yeah. You lost half your destroyer force by the end of either in Narvik or prior to Narvik in operations. You lose 11 out of 22 destroyers. You wipe out most of your senior destroyer officers. German doctrine doesn't matter in World War II. They've lost it because they don't have the ships to actually implement it. And the doctrine they're building seems to be a balanced destroyer doctrine based on them being escorts. They have a gun, which is a general purpose, primarily anti-surface weapon. But it's the old style anti-surface. It's not rapid firing. It's designed to try and be a big punch, which a big punch you can do from a stable platform. This is another thing which is often forgotten. The bigger the gun, the more stable your platform needs to be for it to be able to hit its target. So you clock down from 5.9 inch to 4.7 inch, and you double your guns in each position firing, you actually end up with a lot more of an advantage than you would think you do, because your stability profile is going to less impact their operation that much. The Germans are trying, but they don't have enough ships. And again, this is the thing. Destroyers do not require armor, and they don't require big guns. So the two things which often cause the biggest holdup in ship construction when you're talking about investing in maritime infrastructure do not affect destroyer production. What affects destroyer production is will and interest. And they built 22. 22. In the nicest way, there is another reason why. I say the German Navy is not the Navy the Royal Navy is worried about when World War II begins. World War II begins with of the navies they're fighting. The ones they care about are the Italian Navy, and the ones they potentially might be going to be fighting are the Japanese Navy. The German Navy, they're worried about their surface raiders to an extent. And they're worried about their capacity to build up submarines, but they don't have them at that point. And they're not really worried about the destroyer force because they don't really exist. They're Schnellboats they worry about, but the destroyers are just as limited in numbers, even though it sounds more, 22, but in destroyer numbers, that's nothing. A standard Royal Navy flotilla has 8, and they have 20 of them in service. You have 22 destroyers. Cute! They're bigger and therefore theoretically more capable and more stable than the British utility destroyers, which provide the numbers for the British. But their doctrine is confused. Are these mine-laying destroyers? In which case they can lay mines. That's great. But you also have mine-laying cruisers. Every single one of your ships seem to be able to do mine-laying. Okay, that's good. That's fine. How useful are they? How often used as such? Yeah, they do that quite well. Okay. Are they escorting destroyers? Well, no, you don't really use them for escorting because by the time they can be used for escorting, most of them don't exist anymore. And let's be honest, losing their crews is bigger and more a problem than losing their ships. Simply put, the German destroyer doctrine is all over the place. Andrew, so one can break RM destroyers World War II as convoy escorts, escape S-class, V-class, W-class, utility destroyers A to I class, fleet destroyers tribal J to N class, and wartime general destroyers O class onwards. I know it's a gross oversimplification, but asking from a surface level. That's not bad from a surface level. Hello, Leo Gazebo. Are you also counting the Albion class, small destroyers, escort destroyers, torpedo boats? They are much better design utility-wise. Yes, but that I did sort of mention there, the torpedo button. Grand Duke and Mech Cern. Type 36As have being less seaworthy than my 50-foot carbo moment. They're an issue. Honestly, they do suffer from top weight issues. They suffer from all sorts of problems. One of the interesting things I often think about is the amount of times the US accuses the Japanese of getting German tech. And really, if anyone need to be getting tech, it's the Germans need to be getting Japanese tech. Draconite, hello. I was reminded earlier, it's April Fool's Day in Australia currently. Cool. Rankash, surely with no aircraft carriers online, the German DD should have been bristling with AA. Honestly, the Germans lose some of their destroyers through attack by their own aircraft. Stephen Richards, doesn't Warspite muck up Destroyer Doctrines? Well, to be honest, she's useful for that, but it's the Destroyer Doctrine is supposed to be able to deal with your doctrine for your destroyers is supposed to come with some scenario for dealing with an enemy capital ship. The British have doctrines for how their destroyers deal with enemy capital ships, and basically it's go get as close as they can and ram a torpedo home. But it is done and is carried out on the Italians on a regular basis by usually tribal class destroyers. Nine lost at Narvik and 2 lost at Wikinger, I think, from memory. $11 in total have been lost by Narvik's being finished. In card, does the same apply to German destroyers as secondary armament capable of capital ships, guns not dual purpose? It does to an extent, in that the main guns are anti-surface ships, and they have a theoretical dual-purpose capability, but that's actually less capable than the 4.7-inch, arguably, from the British one. BCH, a 5-inch 50 cal deck gun can fire up to 45 rounds a minute in full auto mode. Yeah, but these aren't automatic. These aren't automatic. These are manual, exposed in gun shields, single 5-inch guns. Why did the RN not respond fast enough to German U-boat construction program their encounters? I can understand the US not being ready for sub-warfare because they were caught off guard. That's called the Hunt-class escort destroyer program and the Flower-class corvette program, which were both ordered well before World War II began and started production. It's one of those cases. They were churning up and they were producing them. But you need a lot more escorts than you do submarines, because your escorts need to be strong everywhere. Your submarines only need to be strong where there is few escorts. So the British were, and they also were doing the upgrade of the V and the Ws into long-range escort destroyers as well. So they had 3 programs going to produce escorts for submarines. We'll get onto that later. And they did, and they were producing them. It's just, it takes time. And the thing is, you hear about the convoys which get into trouble. You hear about the convoys which have problems because they're what the history's written about. but you don't hear about the convoys which get through with barely any trouble at all. You just don't. Look at the history. Look at the number of convoys which were going crossing the Atlantic, and then look at the ones which get written by. And you'll find the ones written about are yes, it does get close at points, and yes, it is very, very troublesome. But there are also periods when Royal Navy, when the convoys are getting through, and there's just we crossed the Atlantic. We had like one incident with a submarine, which we think we had. Hi, Italian Military Archives. Vintage Carter, American Destroyer Doctrine, and RD-31 not work. How influential was his doctrine on US destroyer policy? We'll be talking about that at the end. There's a reason I've stuck the US destroyers at the end. Right. So, summary of German Destroyer Doctrine. We'd like some destroyers, please. We'll figure out what to do with them once we have them. And there's nothing wrong with that. They are starting from a place where they have World War I ships which will not match up at all. And they're trying to build other navies, so they're building general-purpose destroyers. But the thing is, they have 22 in service. So, in British parlance, they don't even have three full flotillas of destroyers in service by the time World War II begins. Because Britain has 8 destroyers per flotilla. And usually we have 8 destroyers and a flotilla leader. Tribal-class destroyers are 8 ships per flotilla. But most other destroyer flotillas are 8 destroyers and a flotilla leader. So, depending on whether you're comparing them to tribals, which in size and tonnage is probably where you should be going, yeah, they have, let's see, 2 3/4 flotillas. If you're comparing them to utility flotillas for the Royal Navy, they have 1.5, 2.5. It's just not good. It's not a balance of force you need to go to war. And this is another point I try and make is people go, Britain's not prepared for war. Yes, but Germany isn't, and they're the ones pushing for it. This is the problem of World War II. Absolutely no one is prepared for war. Because no one is prepared for war. So everyone thinks everyone's getting ready, and everyone thinks they've got time before war because they think everyone else is still getting ready. So this is what they're acting like, and therefore no one is actually ready, and war breaks out. It's absurd. It's comedy of errors. Weren't the Hunt class designated frigates later? Nope. They were escort destroyers. After World War II, there's all sorts of weird things going on. We won't get into that. But in wartime, no. They're always escort destroyers and always ranked to require a destroyer-level commander. Right. So, to the next one. The Italians. All right. Okay, so these are some very good-looking boats. And please note, I'm using the term boat for them rather than ship. Because they are far more torpedo boat than they are destroyer. They are very, very much torpedo. Torpedo. We carry torpedoes. You do? We do. We carry torpedoes. Lots of torpedoes. Do you carry AA guns? Occasionally. They are an interesting bunch of ships. There is something I sit... This is the point. The Italian Navy, in many ways, is one of the best prepared navies for World War II, considering its size and its operational doctrine and its place. Yes, I'd like it to have a carrier because I think it needs organic air power, but that's politics and it's not going to get one of those prior to World War II. Doesn't even get one during the war. Its cruisers are an interesting mix. Some very good and very powerful vessels. Some vessels which, frankly, are destroyer leaders. But in many ways, its torpedo boats are excellent. Its small groups are very good. Its capital ships are well developed to interesting, powerful vessels. But its destroyers. Earlier, someone was saying the British doctrine is get me closer, I want to hit them with my sword. That is the Japanese doctrine, the Italian doctrine, I mean, and to an extent Japanese doctrine, but leave that to one side. But there's different reasons for that. The Italian doctrine is I've looked through their destroyers, and honestly, there isn't. That could well be the Amerigo Vespucci in the background, of the destroyer at the top. I'm not sure which one it is, but I think it is one of their sail training ships. But the thing is, not a single one of their destroyers would I want escorting a task group. They are fine to be a torpedo attack group, and they are perfect for that. But they don't carry the firepower to do so, to do the defensive role. And that's because they are built at the size point at which it's difficult for them to do both roles. Honestly, if you are trying to do a general purpose escort destroyer, you are going to be using roughly 1,500 tons. Not 1,200, not 1,000. You're going to be using 1,500 tons, if not more, in terms of standard. If you want a larger, bigger destroyer, you are going to need the extra weight. And honestly, there's a reason why the big, powerful fleet destroyers the RN has going into World War II, by the way, designed for the purpose of escorting the King George V's, because they're going to be faster, so they need to be bigger and faster and meaner, are the power and size they are. And the tribals are the power and the size they are. Because you are escorting your capital ships and your carriers in battle. Those ships are going to have to both be able to be a strike arm with their torpedoes, but also a shield. And the Italian ships are able to do the strike, but they're not able to do the shield. And I think this is this forces on the Italians to actually be very conservative with their use and their doctrine over their use of their cruisers. Their cruisers have to form that shield far more often, which restricts the cruisers' freedom of movement. Because if cruisers aren't supposed to be, nicest way, cruisers are combatants on major combatants on their own. They're not supposed to be the task group shield. And if they are, that's what you have didos for. That is what a dido is. I often get in this debate. People go, well, should we have, the dido, it should have the 5.25. And I go, no. If you've got a cruiser which is going off independently, it's going to have the 6-inch gun because it needs to be able to take out its targets. It needs the level of oomph the 6-inch weapon system can give it. But if you're defending your task group, then if your cruiser is a task group defense ship, 5.25 is probably the best gun it can have. It's going to take out destroyers and it's going to take out aircraft. Bam, bam, bam. It's a machine gun cruiser, and that's its purpose. But the Italians design their cruisers around being able to do independent operations, and then they have to, because their destroyers can't do the escort work, are having to do task group defense. And their destroyers do end up having to be used for escort forces. This is the thing. I'm not saying the destroyers can't be used for escort. They have to be used for escort. They're what's available. But they're not as well designed for escort work as they could be, because they're not big enough to be capable. Because, again, the Italians have been looking at their treaty tonnage and their experience in the Adriatic from the First World War, and they've gone, yes, what matters is speed and torpedoes. Speed and torpedoes. Speed and torpedoes. And that's their doctrine. Speed and torpedoes. And that's not a bad doctrine if you're fighting an opponent who is not packing with them heavy destroyers. But the trouble is, if you're fighting the French, that's a fine doctrine for dealing with the French, But it's one of the reasons why the French suddenly start building these bigger destroyers towards the end of the 1930s. It's because they've seen what the Italians are doing, going, hang on, we need a counter for this. We need something to protect us. Mama! Mama! Our destroyers cannot protect us as they currently are. Well, Pierre, you know what that means. What, Mama? Build bigger destroyers with some guns on. Really, Mama? Yes, it's that straightforward. Really, Mama? I will get Uncle Lincoln from America to come over here and whack your head. Build them with bigger guns. Yes, Mama Britannia. That is what is basically goes on with the French Navy when we talk about the same. But the Italian destroyers. So here is the thing. If the Italian destroyers have been freed up to attack en masse task groups, like they've been supposed to, they could have caused a lot of trouble. But the Italians both end up using them as escorts, which they're not good for because they haven't been designed around it, and then deploying them in penny packets. And in the nicest way, if they're being deployed on penny packets, which is not their doctrine, they're supposed to be a mass, then all the Royal Navy goes is tribals, J-class, N-class vessels, targets, take them out, bye-bye. And the tribals and the J's and the N's go, hello, yes, have you met our Lord and Saviour, the 4.7 inch? At which the poor Italian ships go, for Italy! Or rather, for Italia! Very shown. Is that an HP 1022 mini laserjet printer? Yes, it is. I've had it for about a decade, and it still works. In fact, no, I've had it longer than a decade. I got this when I was 19 years old. I kept installing them at work when I was an IT technician. And everyone seemed to be raving about them. And I talked to my boss, and he said, well, in the nicest way, we buy them in bulk, so bring in 30 quid next week. And I did. I brought in 30 quid. And he gave it. He basically said, yeah, have it. It's actually a 1018. It's that old. It's a 1018, not even a 1022. And technically, should one consider the Capitani Roman class as a destroyer flotilla leaders? Very small light cruisers or just very large, very large destroyers? That's a whole debate. Freeman, Marine Nationale. But my shipyards are still getting my orders from 1920s, even though it's now the mid-1930s. Yeah. Guys, what all an experience? Speed torpedoes. Funny, nothing was sunk by destroyer torpedoes, only already disabled ships. Please note, I didn't say it was destroyer experience. Remember when I talked about at the beginning with the Italians? It's actually experience from their torpedo boats in the Adriatic. So basically, these are expanded torpedo boats. In German terms, they're torpedo boats. They're called contra-torpiglia for a reason. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It just keeps going. Occasionally, I replace some of the parts, and like this bit's sort of broken, and the top bit's broken at the moment. The bit I have there, but I'll just get new ones. Remember, talk about that because I have last. I have a new. I at last have a new new TV for the first time in 12 years. Cool. Got no cigarette. Cossack. I don't think so, Italians. We're not letting you do that. Do to them what Bismarck to Hood. It's interesting. So, Italian doctrine is grounded in experience, but it's grounded in not the right experience. Okay. I want you to all repeat after me. Yugiri, Yamakaze, Yukikaze. Yugiri, Yamakaze, Yukikaze. And it's from the Dai Nippon Teikoka Kaigon, or Nippon Kaigon. The various names for the Imperial Japanese Navy. And it goes Yugiri, Yamakaze, Yukikaze. Basically, the Japanese Destroyer Doctrine is we need something oceanic capable that can launch very big torpedoes, that has enough guns and firepower to defend our carriers, and that is what they start to build into them, and can take part in the various parts of our doctrine and operations. These are night ambush predators. That is what Japanese destroyer doctrines are. They shield night ambush predators. So in the daytime, they are supposed to protect the carriers and protect the capital ships. At night, they are supposed to be predators. And it's a very straightforward doctrine. Now, the Japanese have problems. Some of their earlier ships are horrendously, because of various attempts to actually get round the treaties, top-heavy. Horrendously and mahusively are top-heavy, with a very high center of mass, which makes them very interesting to handle. Now, believe it or not, there is actually a reason for the high top mass, which isn't necessarily bad, in that it does make your maneuvers very, very fast. You're able to turn very fast. But the trouble is, in rough weather, that high speed of turn, etc., can turn into a rolling over motion, which is an issue. An issue. Hello, who would play for the Broken Tongues treatment? I was thinking more it might actually summon something. Kind of like when you're repeating all the stuff from IKEA. Rich, did Italy have a merchant ship? They did have a merchant fleet. If they hadn't, then the North Africa campaign would have been very short and very quick. It was without the Italian merchant fleet, there would have been no North Africa campaign. They'd have run out of fuel and food fast. So it took IJN a while to figure out the most sensible method for confirming the treaty requirements? Just like? Yeah. Honestly, the IJN, this is the point I've tried to make about the treaties. If you make a bad treaty that makes everyone have to lie, you make war more likely. And it's not with me right at the moment. At the moment, my mum has my copy of my book to show off to my aunt, who's visiting. But we'll get up to one side. But if anyone does happen to have a copy of my Tribals, Battles, and Darings, if you turn to the tribal class section, you will notice that under the tribal class, the list of it, there are all the tonnages listed, and none of those tonnages actually match up to what they're supposed to be, in terms of each one slightly different. You also notice that HMS Nubian has somehow disappeared off the final version. I do not know how she disappeared. I didn't notice in the final check that she disappeared. But she has off the final of that list. I don't know how. She still has her own section in the book, by the way. Please note, there is a whole section about Nubian in there. It's not mentioned in the index. Again, I didn't notice. I just presumed it would be because, I thought all the ships, which specific section would be. But, that's on me for not noticing. I did pay for someone to do the indexing through the publishers, not me, but the thing is, it's on me because I should have noticed that these things are meant to disappear in the final version. It was on Nubian was in every single version of that table from the very beginning. It was the first ship in there, because it's pretty much my favorite tribal, and then it disappears in the final version. Not sure how it gets cut off. But leaving that to one side, you'll notice that the tribal class tonnages are all slightly different. The thing is, when you're ordering these ships, you know they're going to be building them. It's within a margin of error when you're designing a ship. It's within a margin of error. It's like the phrase for the sloops. They must not be designed for more than 20 knots. The fact is, most of the British sloops could do more than 20 knots if you gave them the power. And some of them in World War II would get up to more than 20 knots. And there's the whole incident with Tsingtao incident again, where, honestly, considering HMS Birmingham must have been doing at least 24 knots to get there, the sloop, which is theoretically supposed to max out at 18 knots, arrives at the same time with her in convoy. Interesting question. Anyway, the interesting thing about the Japanese destroyers really is their emphasis on their night ambush predators. They are very good and very well trained for night ambush tactics. In fact, honestly, the worst thing you can be is a cruiser trying to engage these things at night, because they spend most of their interwar years training to do that, just that, to ambush you. And if you're going to engage them at night, you need to be able to do three things. You need to be maneuvering violently. You may still get hit by a torpedo, but you've got more chance if you're doing erratic maneuvers than if you aren't. And two, you need to be engaging them as rapidly as you can. If you're not firing at them, and you're not maneuvering, you're going to get whacked. Again, it's one of the... How do I put it? It sounds terrible. Okay. It's not so much... I hate using the phrase missed opportunity, because that people would have to die. And I don't like any opportunity. I don't like any scenario where people end up dying as something for a historical test or anything like that. That's stupid. But one of the things that doesn't happen in World War II is you don't have a fight between really a Royal Navy destroyer force and a Japanese destroyer force. And considering those are the forces which are equivalently trained in night fighting pre-war, I always think that would be the actual test of the night fighting doctrine of the two navies would be more found in a destroyer battle than any other scenario. And it would be quite interesting to see. It's going to sound strange. It would be it's something to sort of think about and work through, and it would tell us a lot about the realities of night fighting in World War II if that had happened. But it didn't happen. The US Navy developed their own doctrine, and they get a very fine doctrine by the end of the war. But mostly that's thanks to the classes they had at the beginning of the war and their capabilities. It's sad. USN had accurate specifications for J torpedoes, but ignored them and attributed multiple early war torpedo hits to anything but IJN torpedoes because they were too far away. Yeah. There is something to be said for trying to overcome the institutional mountain that is the Bureau of Ordnance. And Thomas Van Odder. She would have been, Sandra Paul, UKZ would have been an amazing museum ship. And as I'm quite happy, I think I've already announced this, but I'm not sure if I've said this on YouTube yet. But the plan for next year is to visit HMAS Vampire. And the hopeful plan is that Drac will be free to come along, and that Jamie will meet us up, and there will actually be a Bilge Pumps meeting in next year in Australia to see HMAS Vampire. And honestly, if Yukiazi still existed, I would be doing a destroyer tour of the Far East, basically going, I'm going to Australia to see a vampire, and then I will go north to see Yukiazi. But unfortunately, she doesn't. I would just wonder something. Did they ever develop a specific torpedo guidance radar? The German radar program started with this in the 1930s, but did other navies do something else along these lines? They looked at it, but honestly, it's actually fielding it. Now, this is the Marine Nationale, and as I said, compensation in progress. And what they're compensating for is the fact that their cruisers are terrible, and they don't have enough good ones. They have Burn, which is just a national embarrassment. They have met most of their battleships, which include the ones in service are the ones coming into service are the only things which look remotely good. And yeah, then on top of that, they realize that, well, as I've said, they have a small problem. They go to Madame Britannia and go, "We have a problem. They have many torpedoes. How do we deal with them?" "By the power of the gun," goes Madame Britannia. And we have the Contre-Torpilla, which are these large, still very torpedo-orientated vessels. And honestly, that's why very inefficient engine designs, and you can tell how inefficient the engines and designs are because of the amount of weight and space they have to waste on funnels. Okay? You have two of these designs have 4 funnels. 4 stacked destroyers go out of fashion during World War One. Even before World War One, they're sort of getting out of fashion. Because if you have to have 4 stacks and the trunking, etc., and the engine spread out, that's taking up a lot of space and weight in your hull. These ships are very speed-orientated, but not very efficient-orientated. Nice again. Burn was supposed to be replaced by Joffrey. Yes, but Burn had not been replaced by Joffrey. Joffrey was not in service, and Joffrey was, yeah. Joffrey's design I'm not even that enamored with, but we'll leave that to one side. Malaga, sounds like to me like 2023 is going to be the year of the Destroyer. It could well become the year of the Destroyer. It could also be the year of the Great Bilge Pumps meetup, because it will be the first time ever all 3 of us will be in one place together, in person. Joe, question about big French destroyers. Were they good material for fast miners in case of replacing some torpedo launchers and torpedo storage for this mine storage rate? Yes, you could have done it in theory. In practice, there are problems with them. There are some... Hang on. Sorry. One of my friends had just sent me a message going, "Are you taking a glass bottle of iron brew with you to hide at a smash on about?" No, I'm not. I'm not being that cruel to hide it. The iron brew might dissolve our paint. VCH, being a tin can sailor myself, when did destroyers start being colloquially referred to as tin cans? World War One. basically, the French destroyers are built to escort, especially these big contre-torpedoes, to escort their capital ships in the Mediterranean and to provide presence. And this is another way. This is another thing which doesn't happen in World War One or Two, which would have been sort of quite interesting. The French and the Italian doctrines are in many ways developed to fight each other, and they never really get to have that battle. They never get to have that battle. All right, give me a second. Just heard a noise. Oh, hello. Sorry. The lights on the outside of the office had fallen on. They'd come off the gutter. Hey, by gum. Something was whacking on my door, and I was going, "What is it?" And it was literally the lights had managed to pop out, probably in the wind we've got at the moment, had pop out from the hook holding them, and had plopped down and were dangling in front of my door. Television, I'm back. Yeah, you're not the only one. Vision, you have my sympathies. My appointment to have my tooth taken out keeps being rescheduled. Mainly because I have to be put to sleep, because apparently I don't do well with people sticking things in my mouth. So it's better for everyone if I'm knocked out for the experience. Vernad's shown. Did any of these large destroyers actually take on other small destroyers or cruisers? Not in the case of the French. In the case of the Royal Navy larger destroyers regularly took on cruisers. And of course, there's the Battle of Cape Bon, where they, the Royal Navy destroyers involved, which included 2 tribal-class destroyers, basically decided that, attacking the Italians from the Mediterranean side would just be too obvious. So they got between the Italians and the Italian coast and took them out from the Italian coast side. Actually, here's the other thing. Nicest way, if you give Haida iron brew, might that awaken the machine spirits inside her, and then we have to deal with her sailing the 7 seas under her own control, under her own power, powered by the warp. Okay, there's a real risk for you. Haida plus iron brew equals warp powered tribal sailing the 7 seas. Building the new Canadian maritime empire. How do they manage to disguise the admirals to look like, I'm not even going to try and spell it, it's like the French big destroyers? Well, pretty much they look like them already because they had the 4 stacks. So, they look similar enough in outline they would pass for it to an extent. But on the show, did the Regina Marina really use speed smoke on all their ships like in modern warships? Not really. Siegen 90. What is the deal with the French gun calibers? Okay, how do I explain this politely? The French are nuts when it comes to gun calibers. That is the only logical explanation. I was trying to avoid it because I'm fairly certain the long patrol is going to include a small rant about gun calibers, but leaving it to what, let's just get into it. Basically, what the French do is they take the inch guns, and then decide they're going to use millimeters for them, and turn them into exact millimeters. And some they decide to round up, which is why you get 5.1 inch and 6.1 inch being the limit for things, because the French round them up to an even number, 155 or whatever. And, yeah. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just go for a weird figure. And they go, but it works. And everyone else is looking and going, but you're trying to drive us insane. If you're doing what, why 138? Why not just 140? Or 150? But there again, once you're 150, you're talking about 6-inch guns. So, you have to work your way down. And before, basically, to explain the lights again of it, I still have the Christmas, what I call the winter lights rather than the Christmas lights that we put along our guttering on our office. Well, I put along the guttering on the office, etc., and around the office. I rather liked and decided that, frankly, I was going to leave up because they're nice and pretty when I have to work late and I end up leaving the office and I want to turn on a light to give myself the ability to see when I'm walking up and down the garden. So they're still there, and that's what got blown off by the wind. Alowski, 5.1 inch is 130 millimeter. That actually makes some sense. Yes. 138 millimeters is that's not 5.5 inch, is it? No, it's 5.3 inch. Natural 5.5 inches to 159. Round it up to 140. Just make my life easier. Stop trying to give me a headache if you're French. And some French calibers were meaningful numbers in French pounds. Livres in the muscle loader. Yeah, that is the other fun. Agreed on the French Destroyers 1922 to 56 by Jordan Mullen. Anything by John Jordan is a pretty good book. Basically, Lambert, Grove, Freeman, Jordan, Armstrong. If those names are attached to it, it's going to be a good book. Faulkner, it's going to be a good book. Soviet Navy. Razumny, Tashkent, and Leningrad. Now, Leningrad is built for them by the Italians, and is possibly one of the best Italian-built destroyers in World War II. But it looks like an Italian version of the Contra Toppelia, honestly. Razumny is this escort small utility destroyer, which is a pretty good design. And Tashkent is this home-built destroyer leader. So this is the home-built destroyer leader versus the Italian-built destroyer leader for the Soviets. Honestly, what I think the Soviets are shaping up to do is to build a good force to escort their capital ships. They are building up a good escort destroyer flotilla. And a fighting destroyer flotilla. A destroyer flotilla which can do defense as well as offense. But they never get really to use that. As such, they spend most of their time doing individual actions. And honestly, they only have one of these. So it can't really do much. That's the thing. If you're going to do an individual destroyer action, as time and time again shows, the larger destroyers in a pack are what you send for individual actions. And they will terrify the enemy, because that's their job. It's basically a case of, okay, I have these 4 slightly unhinged Hulk destroyers. Okay. All right. And what are you doing? I'm letting them go. Okay. And that usually works quite well. The trouble is the Russians don't have the math. Again, they have a similar problem as the Germans. They just don't have enough. I keep coming back to this, and I keep trying to explain to people, thanks to the various treaty systems and other things, no one is prepared for World War II in 1939. And it's arguable whether even Japan and USA are prepared for war in 1941. Which tells you something. You're most likely going to fight a war when you're not prepared for it. So sibi pacem para bellum. Those who seek peace should prepare for war. Be prepared all the time for a war of a certain level. Vision. Down to the left is holiday lights up on the Japanese maple tree on the front as well. Many places have year-round lighting with white lights. Dads are all coloured. Yeah, just the outside lights, really. Give me a second. I still have my indoor winter lights going. And the outdoor ones are just as coloured. It's nicer to have the coloured ones. White is just so white and mundane. Let's go for the multicoloured. No. Russia, Italy. So, what are some wars where the participants were actually prepared? Well, the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch were arguably prepared. Honestly, some of the Napoleonic Wars, the both sides were prepared because basically peace was just just last as long as it took for each side to rearm properly, and then it was back to it again. Yeah. Wars where one side has been prepared or not. Well, you've got some of the interesting examples of the 6-Day War, etc. That arguably to one side, it turned out the Israelis were far more prepared than the Arabs. So yeah, you have had wars where people have been prepared. To an extent, they've been prepared in that they have a level of resilience built into their system to absorb the initial impact and allow them time to actually mount up. But there is a difference between. I'm not saying you have to be 100% prepared for war, but let's put it this way: the Royal Navy was less than 30% through its preparations for war. That's because a whole lot were due to come true and be done in the 1939, 1940, 1941 period. And the whole point was to be ready for war roughly in 1942, with 2/3 to 3/4 done. So they would be 70% prepared for war. It's arguably what they were aiming for. And that's arguably the level you can aim at, to a sort of an aim level of preparation of 70%. But when you're less than 50% prepared for war, i.e., 50% less than 50% of your forces at what it would call its fighting efficiency level, then you're in trouble. And fighting efficiency level, I do not mean crew-wise. The Royal Navy managed to maintain fighting efficient crews in the interwar period, and I would argue to an extent the Italians had also as well done that, and you can see that in some of their operations. The Germans, thanks to the limited size of their fleet, hadn't really been able to. But the Japanese had, and the Americans had to an extent, much in sort of more in spite of Congress and its meddling than any support of their nation. Well, actually, no, they had the support of the nation, just not the support of Congress, because Congress would often. This is what I find fun about, especially American politicians. British politicians are honest; they're not bothered about the defense and not planning on spending anything on it. There's a few who would like to actually spend on it, but most of us just say, "Oh no, we have to spend on this, this, and this." American politicians actually usually claim we're going to spend more money on defense, and then when they get involved, they're actually spending money not on defense as part of the defense budget. Ireland was better prepared for the Napoleonic Wars after being rather unprepared for the War of Independence. To be fair, the War of Independence was part of the Napoleonic War period. So, again, as I try and point out, War of Independence, NDC, War of 1812 are sideshows to everything else the Royal Navy's doing at the time. I am sorry. It has no impact or reflection of the power and importance of America today or the status of it in the world. But in the War of Independence period and in the 1812 war, America is a sideshow. They just aren't aren't going to get the main focus of the efforts. Not from the Royal Navy. You can argue that in the War of Independence they should have deserved a more of a focus from the British Army. I would agree with that one. And especially should have deserved probably some of their better generals. I would agree. But again, the naval forces of the Americans in the War of Independence were nil to nil point. And basically, it was the French fleet which turned up and helped you. And in many ways, the French fleet were the ones who managed to get out of Europe, which was where the Royal Navy was supposed to be bottling up, and which was where the Royal Navy had their better ships concentrating on the French fleet. It's one of those things. As far as the Royal Navy is concerned, the War of Independence and the War of 1812 are sideshows to the major effort, which is facing off against the French. Sorry. So Thomas Vanderbilt, even their arms built up before World War One, didn't even get close to the required amount of ammunition or heavy artillery being needed before the conflict for all sides. No, but that's mainly because the whole numbers of that were grossly underestimated. Grossly underestimated. Nigerian, USSR destroyers do how much in World War II? Well, if we go back to them quickly, because I missed that question in part of our questions, they do a lot. In fact, there are some Russian Navy ships meeting Arctic convoys in the White Sea, but mostly they are Russian minesweepers. Sometimes there are some destroyers, and of the Razumin class mainly. But mostly these ships are important in the Black Sea, which is actually a pretty important theatre. I know the main person who tends to go on about the Black Sea is Sal Merchiagos, but he is correct. The Black Sea is important, and if you want to ask him on his channel about the Black Sea, he can wax poetic and lyrical about the operations going on the Black Sea for quite a while. Let's see. Vision. Yes, US was ready for Desert Storm thanks to Cold War build-up, but that made it illegal under US law, which meant we'd be unprepared for war. No. Yeah. Good joke, though. British. Did the French or Italians ever get into hedgehog DCs during World War II? Just after they start to get into those sort of systems, because it's after World War II that they start to basically, as you start to form NATO and those sort of things, and the early works on those to meet the emerging Soviet threat is when they start to get access to those things. Vision. Britain lost America as a sort of sideshow. Well, to an extent, it wasn't really the Navy's job to deal with America. That was supposed to be the Army. So basically, we lost America because it was an Army job, and yeah, the British Army in those days was interesting. I don't. Oh, you thought it. I thought it in the nicest way. If you ever want to wind up an entire class of American students, you start them with the lessons of amphibious warfare, and you ask them why the White House is painted white. It's off topic for today, but if anyone doesn't know the reason the White House is painted white, it's because it covers up the burn marks which the British troops left it with when we stole the victory feast that the American president was planning on having in there once the British amphibious assault was defeated. And the British amphibious assault wasn't defeated. And they, in the nicest way, you do not tell the British that you're going to have a victory feast and you're preparing all the food. Because nothing will motivate British squaddies of any century more than the idea that there is a feast at the other end. Okay? You do not do that. That is psychology 101 when dealing with the British Army. Do not tell them there is food at any point the other side of the battle line from them. They will get there. That is on you, okay? That is on no one else. They said that the Americans were organizing a victory feast. The British found out they were going for the food, okay? They were going for the food. It's on America for that one. I'm sorry. It's not our fault. Everyone knows you do not tell the British squaddy there is food. So, Soviet doctrine? Well, we don't get to see it much. As I said, we get individual actions, which is not really reminiscent of what Soviet doctrine shows us. And we get their mine laying, we get some of them providing fire support for operations. But we don't have the big ships. These ships are being built to escort capital ships, and they just don't exist. Then, what if they are told there will be food if there's no fight? That you didn't tell them that. You said you were going to have a victory dinner and you weren't going to invite us. That is guaranteed it. No, the US Navy had, 5 frigates in 1800? Compared to, several dozen ships on the line, at least to the French? 4 Trafalgar Lanes? Yeah. At certain points, the British American West Indies station actually outnumbered the Americans 2-1 in peacetime, even when they were fighting the French. Mm-hmm. And yet Lorenz on familiarity North America got HMS Ontario sunk. There's always going to be problems. You do enough operations and enough ships, you get into issues. So here's the poor Hellenic Navy. And I do say the poor Hellenic Navy. They have a mixture of World War One ships, some British-built, some British Greek versions, basically of the British utility destroyers, and even some Italian design destroyers. Honestly, it's a mess. The Greeks don't have capital ships, but they do, of course, have a massive islands which they need to protect. And it's working out how to protect them and how to reinforce them. And honestly, they need destroyers, but they don't get the right destroyers. The Italian-built destroyer is certainly closer to what they need than the British-built destroyer. I will say that. But they really need a British sort of fleet-level destroyer. But the trouble is, by the time the British are building them, the Greeks don't really have much time and don't really have the money. So, honestly, what the Greeks need is an L, a J, K, or an N. Something big and meaty and nasty. And what they have are an Italian sort of destroyer leaderish sort of design, which is, it has interesting maintenance issues, and actually in one of their cases ends up being captured by the Germans and used by the Germans. And some British utility destroyers. And neither of them they have enough numbers. If you're going to buy British utility destroyers, the whole point about the British with the utility destroyers, and this is the point, the British are attempting to square the circle. And the British problem is that they have to provide destroyers for so many roles. They have to square a circle. And this is one of the things I'll be getting into. The British have to build a lot of destroyers to do a lot of different roles. The point is the utility destroyers are supposed to be built on mass. They are built at 2 flotillas a year, pretty much, from 1930 or 1932-ish onwards. And yeah, the point is they are built to be deployed en masse. There is a large number of them. They are ready to come get you. That is their job. Whoomp. Goodbye. You're dead. They come at you in numbers. And they're supposed to come at you in numbers, and if they come at you, they're supposed to have the larger fleet destroyers sort of in front of them going, yeah, you want to get to our mates who are going to overwhelm you in torpedoes? You got to go through me. And I'm big. You know, that's pretty much the tribal class destroyers. The tribal role for the Royal Navy is to be the tip of the spear in front of the sledgehammer that is the destroyer flotillas en masse attack. That is the doctrine. For the Greeks, they need ships which can do fighting between islands, can present a torpedo challenge to enemy warships and larger ships, especially the Italian Navy, who are a likely threat, but can also, you know, do the duties they need to do and basically be survive on their own. That's not going to do that, and that's not going to do that. Basically, the only designs which can do that are the tribal class destroyers that are built in their timeline. But instead, they have utility destroyers, and they have a destroyer leader, and you sit there and go, okay, so what are you aiming for? And you can see what they're aiming for is a version of what the British have got with their utility destroyers and the destroyer leader, which is basically you have these mass formations of destroyers. And honestly, you get the idea. The Greeks are looking at the British World War I flotilla defense doctrine, what was basically around the Harwich Force and the Channel Fleet and those sort of operations, and going, that would be a good idea for us. But you see, the thing is, if I was going for that in the 1930s, I would say your destroyers become your destroyer leaders for those operations, and torpedo boats become your mass ships. I suppose they wanted more operating distance and more range and more protection and survivability than they get from the torpedo boats. So that affects their design choices. But again, they don't get enough of them, and they don't have the money to get enough of them. So they're caught between a rock, a hard place, and a deep blue sea. And they have no choice. It was an H-class destroyer. So, people have difficulty understanding the difference in thinking between Britain, Russia, or, say, Germany. Britain's always going to try to dominate balanced naval power, even if it means giving up empire. Honestly, because Britain's going to try and dominate naval power because that is what preserves its empire. As long as it dominates naval power, it can maintain its empire. And that's the reality for Britain. Vision. Technically, it wasn't the Brits who burnt down Buffalo in the War of 1812, it was the Canadians. Technically, it was the Canadians. This is the point as well. It's like there's a lot of Americans who tell me about various things the Brits did in the War of Independence, and I go, no, that was actually the American units fighting on behalf of the British, the Loyalists, who were far more vicious than the British troops were. That's the scary thing sometimes for some Americans, that there were Loyalists who were fighting to keep the British Crown in charge. Let's not forget the animosity to Turkey and Greece. Did the Turks actually have any navy in the 1920s? The Turks did have a navy, and they were buying British utility destroyers as well. They were buying the Eyes, which end up getting, in the true Royal Navy fashion, we've signed 3 treaties where we are not allowed to compulsory purchase nations' ships when war begins. Yes, goes America. We've just done it to the Turkish destroyers. Again. Every single war you do this, Britain. Yep. Not bothered. As I was saying earlier, I said in a video this week about the Argentinian destroyer, ARA La Argentina. If war had broken out with Japan in January 1939, that would have been compulsory purchased within 5 minutes. I mean, literally, it would have been a case of war started. Yep, these ships are all compulsory purchased. All the Turkish destroyers, probably the Greek destroyers if they were still around at that point. I think one of them might have been. And the Argentinian cruiser, yeah, that's ours now. Very much every ship which was going to be delivered would have been purchased into the Royal Navy. That is also British doctrine. I swear. No matter how many treaties we sign where we promise we're not going to do that, we do it every single war. We do it. Get used to it. But understand, did the French DDs really not use smoke? No, the French DDs did have limited smoke abilities. It's World of Warships thing. There's Voxer. Is there a fleet that wouldn't have loved the tribal class destroyer flotilla too? Interesting enough, probably the US Navy, because doctrinally they wouldn't fit in with the US Navy. As said again, the point is I'm making a doctrine point, and there's a reason the tribal class fit as they do, because the tribals are designed for 2 doctrines, and that's why they would fit. But you notice I didn't say the Germans would have liked a tribal class destroyer because it wouldn't have fitted with them and their needs. The tribal class destroyer was a better fighting destroyer than the German destroyers, but the German destroyers were designed as general purpose destroyers to do every single job. So for them, the tribal class destroyer was hopelessly over-orientated. The Italians didn't need a tribal class destroyer. The Italians needed bigger destroyers. They, as this design shows, they are capable of designing perfectly good equivalents to the Contra Torpillas, but they don't have them. And this is a far better design than those. F100. Did the Turks manage to get their money back? At some point, I think they got them. This Fox, did the Iran compulsory purchase any Turkish Ottoman ships in White Cell? No, they didn't compulsory purchase any Turkish or Ottoman ships. I think they did capture a couple, but they didn't compulsory purchase them because the Ottomans built their own. Well, yeah, I mean, they're not going to find themselves stuck in a land conflict. But we only got 200 words. What here? The word one was an exception to rule. Land warfare rise. Yeah, it's a bit weird. Law is not allowed to compulsory. Yeah, no, pretty much in every single treaty, from the Washington Treaty onwards, there is something about you're not supposed to compulsory purchase other people's ships which are being built in your in your state. For example, in the Washington Treaty, Article 17. In the event of a contracting power being engaged in war, such power shall not use as vessel of war any vessel of war which may be under construction within its jurisdiction for any other power, or which may have been constructed within its jurisdiction for another power and not delivered. Article 17 of the Washington Naval Treaty. You're not supposed Britain, which basically could be rewritten as Britain, you can't compulsory purchase every single ship in your harbour which you are building for someone else. And which the British do. Yeah, I don't tend to write in silence. I tend to research the classical music, plan to jazz, and write to rock and roll. So, the poor Greeks, they just don't have enough ships. And they then get swept into the British doctrine, and used as the British doctrine for World War II. They are folded into the Royal Navy and are used as such. That's when British use the phrase compulsory purchased. But no, it's a very specific thing. As I say, Ottomans, Turks of power, we can consider them such. They were for much of the period, mainly because of where they sat geographically. Nice one. So they need to maintain supremacy, yet in the 41 they lose Prince of Wales, Ark Royal, Repulse, Hood. Who's definitely. Yes, they do lose those ships, but, they still maintain supremacy. Because, let's be honest, they lose Hood, but the Germans lose Bismarck. So that's fine. That's balanced out. They lose Ark Royal, but the Germans and Italians have nothing equivalent to Ark Royal. They lose Prince of Wales and Repulse, which is more annoying from the Far East perspective. But they managed to reconstitute a Indian Ocean fleet quite quickly. It would have been a far more offensive and capable fleet if it had Prince of Wales and Repulse in it, but that's a whole different debate. The point is, the British are still building ships and able to do so. And that's the other thing which goes on in World War II, which you have to remember. The British and the Americans are still launching ships throughout the war. There is very little new construction coming into service in Japan and Italy and Germany through the war. Supremacy doesn't mean you don't lose ships. Supremacy means that, or superiority or control of the sea, means you still are able to exercise and use the sea and dictate to extent the use of the sea, even if you do lose ships. And that's what the British were aiming for. But at least they let the Italian-built Swedish destroyers go. Yes, after studying them a bit. Emrigs, regarding compulsory purchase of foreign ships and the stocks, the British have been called many things. Perfidious Albion comes to mind, but nobody called them stupid. No. It's, yeah. Then we have the Dutch. Now, the Amarante class and the various other admirals their destroyers are named for, again, are good ships. But again, this is going to sound strange. The Dutch destroyers are escorts for their battle cruisers, which aren't built. This is what the destroyers are built around. You know, you can see when you look at, especially at this ship, you can see a horde of them surrounding a Dutch battle cruiser and being thrown into a battle in the Southeast Asia, defending the Dutch East Indies. That is what the Dutch are building for. The trouble is the battle cruiser is not built, and in many what happens is the Dutch destroyers either get taken over by the Germans or they form up the Brits, and the Brits go, these are pretty good large fleet destroyers. And Dutch officers in modern go, yes, we are very good. The British go, fine. Isaac Spheres, yes. Would you like to play Tribal Class Destroyer? Yes. Let us go play then. And pretty much that's where they slot in. And again, a tribal wouldn't have fitted whilst the Dutch destroyers fit in with the tribals in the Royal Navy, the tribals wouldn't have fitted in with the Dutch. These are far better designed for the Dutch. They are capable enough to fit in with the tribals for the Royal Navy, but they're not the same as good a fit as a tribal for the role. But they're able to fit in with it, and they're very good, capable ships. In many ways, the Dutch are building some of the finest destroyers prior to World War II. They are some of the finest vessels, but they are part of a fleet they're being built for. And that's they're going all admirals. So you have the Amarante class, you have this one, which I keep forgetting the name of the class, but basically all the Dutch ships are named for admirals. I don't know, just like air superiority doesn't mean you lose very few aircraft. Yeah. It's, how do I put this? You have the first lesson of war that you really need to learn, and you have to often teach political leaders, especially these days when they get into power, is that you lose stuff. They who design a fleet which is not designed to lose anything because they don't believe they're going to are going to lose massively. Or to quote a more recent politician, bigly. They will lose. They will lose a lot. Because that's what you have to design fleets around. You have to design fleets around loss. Because you're going to lose it. And you don't in many ways know what you're going to lose. You know what's probably going to be most exposed, so you build in redundancy for that in the first place. But you also have to go, well, hang on, what's the critical thing that if I lose in this system, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble? Okay, I better build a redundancy in for that. And what's the next most critical thing? Well, probably we should build in some redundancy for that. And these things are all quite useful. And can I build in a collectively redundancy for that? Piet Hein. Yeah, I think that was one of them. Let me look up their names for the Dutch, and we'll see if I can pronounce my Dutch ships better than I was pronouncing earlier. Okay, let me just get the Dutch destroyer up. Now, they had, of course, HMS Tromp, which was a destroyer leader, which was theoretically a cruiser. of 3,550 tons as well, which suggests they're thinking about mass destroyer usage. But there's the Gerard Callenber class, which are what the bigger ones are, which of course was what Isaac Spears was. And the Admiralin class, which is what this vessel is, which were Van Gent, Everston, Cortena, Piet Hein, Van Galen, Witt de With, Bankart, and Van Ness. I think Witt de With is the one pictured. Yeah, WW, Witt de With. And she is scuttled in 1942 due to damage sustained during the Battle of the Java Sea. Honestly, the Dutch destroyer pre-World War II destroyers do not have a good experience. The Callenber class, well, Isaac Spears is, of course, sunk in November 1942. She's, of course, towed to England and completed there. The Gerard Callenber is scuttled but salvaged and commissioned as ZH-1 by the Germans and is sunk in the 9th of June 1944 in a interesting little battle, which is often called the Battle of Ushant, which involves the 10th Destroyer Flotilla of the Royal Navy, which has Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Navy tribal class destroyers, of course, and it's trying to attack. It's part of the force which is trying to attack the D-Day landings, and basically they get bushwhacked by 10th Flotilla. Yeah, she's one of the ships sunk during that. Admiralin class, they're just all picked off as penny packets. Van Gent is scuttled in 1942 after having served as part of Admiral Karl Dorman's command. Everston is sunk by the IJN in 1942. Cortena is sunk by a torpedo from Hagaro at the Battle of Java Sea. Piet Hein is sunk during the Battle of Bering Strait in February 1942. Which is another battle I want to do a video about at some point. Van Galen was dispatched to help the defense of Rotterdam, and, well, she ended up being targeted by bombers of the Germans, sunk in May 1940, and then salvaged and scrapped by the Germans. As mentioned, Witt de With was sunk during the Battle of the Java Sea, or thanks to the Java Sea. Bankart was sunk by Japanese bombers and scuttled in Surabaya dockyard, salvaged, and by the Japanese, not repaired and returned to the Dutch. And Van Ness was sunk after a 2-hour battle by Japanese aircraft in February 1942, while escorting an evacuation ship, which was also sunk. Yeah. The Dutch Navy, not good to be a destroyer. Not good to be a destroyer at all. And then they get some JK and N class destroyers from the Royal Navy. And it's, well, JK and N get turned over to them at certain points. Yeah, they get 2 Ns. The Van Galen Trekkides. Van Galen survives World War II. And Trekkides also survives World War II. Basically, don't be a Dutch destroyer in World War II. It's not good. It's really not good. The RN probably claimed that they did not need not to be banned act. They did very similar. Well, they claim many things for that. They just did it, and then others said the Foreign Office can deal with it after we've done it. And the Americans lodged a formal protest, and the British and the Royal Navy was going, "We don't care. We need the ships." But at least they let the Italian-built Swedish destroyers go. I didn't mention that earlier, but yes, they did. But that was only because they decided they didn't really need them. And look, as General Robert E. Lee is to say, and paraphrasing, you love your army, yet you must be prepared to risk it all and sacrifice the thing you love for victory. Yeah. Vanished. Whose nation ships were the Dutch destroyer line comprised of? The Dutch built their own. This is the thing, the Dutch could build their own ships and did. They just didn't build a lot of them. There's a Foxo. USN planned for the loss of the majority of their aircraft carriers. Did they do the same for the fast oilers pre-order? So the auxiliaries tend to be ignored by Congress most of the time. To an extent, the US Navy presumed they were probably going to lose a lot of them. They hoped they didn't lose all of them because they didn't know how quickly they get to replace them. Any survivors? Not as many as you'd hope. Norwegian Navy! Oh, goodness me. Right, so this is the point. The Norwegians are building these ships theoretically to try and help out with their coastal defense ships. And I often think the actual calling them a destroyer is a bit of a misnomer. How do I put this politely? So, they got 4 of them end up in service with the Germans during World War II. They're called Low, which Panther, Tiger, and Leopard. Or well, I presume Low is the German for lion. In German service, they were called Sleeper, Ega, Gilla, Odin, and Tor, and Balder in Norwegian service. They're reclassified as torpedo boat Ausland by the Germans rather than calling them destroyers. So if even the destroyers are Germans are classifying you as a torpedo boat, perhaps you're not a destroyer. Now, they've been preceded by the Drag class, which were how do I put this politely? They'd all been launched before. Well, they've been launched 1908, 1910, and 1913. Which is possibly the longest build time ever for vessels which weigh in at 587 tons. This class weighed in at 735 tons, carried 3 100mm guns, 1 40mm gun, 2 machine guns, which were Colt 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine guns. Yes, they carried Colt machine guns. We can all be slightly afraid for the operators. And 2 533mm torpedo tubes. And 4 depth charge throwers. They are just not destroyers. They really aren't. And I have... This is the thing. If you build your defense and your maritime naval defense around big, powerful, but slow coastal defense ships in a bid to appear not threatening, then you need to give those coastal defense ships some kind of chance to survive a fight. Which means you need to give them something which can cause most destroyers to have something else to fix on. These aren't going to do that. 300mm guns are not going to worry any destroyer at this time. They're just not. 2 torpedo tubes are not going to worry any destroyer at this time. They're just not. They're not even going to... This is the thing. These ships are... This is building a toothless torpedo doctrine. There is fitted for but not with, which is an embarrassment. But there is being fitted with... What? That is an even bigger embarrassment. Because if you read some of the press releases put out by the various political parties in Norway about these ships, you would think they were the second coming of Dreadnought. I mean, yeah. And they are... Okay, so you're going to go... Right then, you're building something which is 735 tons. It's got a crew of 75. Okay, alright. So, I'm going to expect it's going to be really fast. I'd want it to be really, really fast. I'm talking 40-odd knots. Something, okay, if you're going to have this long, you're going to want to be so high speed that, frankly, everyone's still going to be scared of you. 32 knots. In the correct weather, because they are so light, they have trouble with heavy seas. And it's not as if Norway is regularly has heavy seas around it, does it? Oh. Hang on. Norway's coast is the North Sea and North Atlantic and the White Sea, right? Yeah, that's not heavy. Those aren't seas where the waves are known to be how high? Yeah, and these ships are what? They have a draft of 4 meters, a beam of 7.8 meters, and a length of 74.3 meters. No, thank you. I think if I have to pick between serving in one or walking the coast with a pair of binoculars and a grenade to defend the country, I will pick the binoculars and the grenade. It would have less seasickness. Yeah, the only picture I can find of it is post World War II with this false bow wave built on it and pictured on it. Richard Order, random question: what ship would you use as a desert dungeon desert dungeon for D&D? Like, it's just portal dropped in the middle of a fantasy desert. What monsters would you have inhabit it? Okay, I did actually do this once, and I used a pre-dreadnought battleship. I have played D&D as the Master of Ceremonies, as I title myself. About 3 times, and one of those times I did use a pre-dreadnought, and I think one of the I think the scariest monster I had was a sort of like an inhabited version of the ship's cat, which had somehow grown supersized and managed to absorb the boarding guns into its body. And it could shoot cannonballs out of its tail, sort of thing. That though I haven't looked at in about 15 years, so yeah, that was a long time ago I did that. I've got it, must have it written up somewhere. Or is it on an old computer? Probably on an old computer, but I do probably have a written up. It wasn't, it might have been a French pre-dreadnought. I think it was a French pre-dreadnought. But that's not something I tend to admit to publicly out loud too much. Vintage Car History. Weren't Norwegian destroyers best known for playing hide and seek? They were best known for disappearing. No, Swarovski, this ship is like the Mark 14 torpedo, designed to explode but not fitted to explode. It's designed to do something. Norwegians are trying to go for a Hood propaganda effect, making a ship so powerful that scares everyone, but unlike Hood, these destroyers like the size and firepower to back it up. Basically, Hood looks and sounds scary. These do not look and sound scary. They are not scary. There is nothing scary about this ship in any way, shape, or form. There just isn't. Oh, the Polish Navy. 2x2, Vickers and Grom. The Polish really haven't built much of a navy, mostly because they decided that, frankly, they had to concentrate on either an army or a navy, and then the army was going to win. Because they have huge land borders. Pardon me, need some more iron brew. And a very small sea border. And where's the iron brew I bought yesterday? Because I have 6 bottles of iron brew down here, so I should make sure I do them in the right order. Yes, I got an iron brew stock up the other day. Oh, yesterday. But they're still building powerful ships. We often hear about the Groms. We don't hear so much about the Wickers, but both classes are built to be powerful destroyers. And there is a reason for this. They are, in many ways, the Polish answer to a they're basically going, we need a one-stop shop, which is an answer to everything. It's got the big torpedoes to attack the large surface combatants. It's got the guns to take on the other destroyers and torpedo boats. And it's got anti-aircraft firepower. This is what the Polish Navy are building. And it would have been interesting to see how their Navy developed into a tactical doctrine. But honestly, I could see them using groups of these destroyers, probably acting in fours rather than pairs, to do destroyer sweeps in the Baltic. In the Baltic. That's what they would probably have wanted to do if they'd had their choice. They didn't get to do that. And instead they get folded into the British doctrine. They turn into absolute maniacs, but good maniacs. And they're very well built, the ships. This is the thing. The reason I'm as hard on the Greeks and the Norwegians as I am is because you've got Poland, which has all the reason in the world to focus on the army. All the reason in the world to focus on the army. And they do. But they still manage to still get these built and actually think it through. And they don't just order copy and paste of another navy or build something which is pathetic in every single stretch of the imagination. But they actually go right then, what do we need? What capability? Let's work through what style of destroyer best suits us. What's the weapons fit, which is best suiting us? What is the organization which is best going to fit us? And that is what they build. And they get very good ships because of it. And a bit stuff cool. Norway wasn't that rich back then. Probably would be better if they put those torpedoes in more for the odds defense to give the best money to the army. Honestly, they could have done it better than they did. It's going to sound strange. Norway isn't so poor they couldn't have invested in more destroyers. They have enough money coming in. They didn't. It wouldn't have caused a massive increase in budget to go for a slightly better build ship than they were going. I was asking you, Wicker is not a separate class. Those are French brass classes. Yes and no. Actually, this is going to sound strange. They are built into a Piruin is adopted from the Royal Navy after World War II has begun. But the Vickers class, kind of like the Groms, the Vickers are adapted in that I would say they are far better. Their design has been modified to enough extent to fit the Polish requirements. So they are not a straight build of the French design by any stretch. But you could have copied and pasted the French design, but they don't. They build a adapted version. Yes, it has some similarities with the French design. I will concede that one completely, but it is built in a slightly modified style. And immediately the Polish build it, they go, engines aren't good. They take up a lot of space here. And then they go to the British and go, wow, so we can have that and we only have to have one funnel? Yeah. Oh. Dr. Clarke, did the German S-boats make up in any way for the shortcomings of destroyers? Not really. Because the problem is the destroyers, it's the numbers. And the thing is, the S-class can't fulfill the fill-in for the destroyer role. The S-class Schnellboots are very good, but they can't fulfill the escort role of the destroyers, and the destroyers aren't available in enough numbers. Honestly, what you should have been going right. So for every major capital ship, we need at least a flotilla of destroyers to escort them. Okay, right then, and we need half a flotilla for each cruiser. Okay, so how many cruisers are we building this year? 2. How many capital ships? 1. Okay, so we need to build at least 2 flotillas of destroyers this year alone. Yes. You know, in 1934, you need to go straight in with an order of 16. I need to keep that up. 1934A, it's another 16. 1936, another 16. You should have had 48 destroyers plus in service by the time World War II began, if you were Germany. In any way, shape, or form to be prepared. And then if you lose 11, well, that's fine. You've lost nearly 25% of your destroyer strength. Yeah, that's annoying. But that's not wiped out your entire ability to do naval operations, and you can recover from that with your 36As and all the rest coming up. You can recover up to 48. But in the nicest way, once you're down below 20, you're down to 11, you're basically constantly trying to recover up to 22, which isn't enough in the first place to do the job. And also, Borean is manned by pretty much Polish army personnel who transfer from the Navy and get trained by the Royal Navy in large numbers. There are a few Polish naval personnel involved. As I see, also the main premise behind those destroyers was countering the Soviet Navy in a war on the East scenario and protecting the supply convoy going to Baltic. Yeah, one of the things that's often forgotten about Poland is that in the 1920s and 1930s, they do have wars with the Soviet Union. Some of them actual declared wars, some of them sort of undeclared operations. And they do actually win and fight them. There's a very the Polish generals do a really good job, and that is why that is in many ways was also explains the structure of their forces and the quality of the Polish military. It's one of the things you have to remember is the Poles had already fought wars for their survival before even World War II happens. They have quite a well-trained military. They had to. They have these destroyers. They're built for, as I said, sweeps of the Baltic, convoy protection, those sort of duties. They're sensible. Well, let's put it this way. The Wickers are still better than actually the basic French ships. And as said, the Polish Navy were not... As I said, the Polish Navy looked and went, you'll spend a lot of weight on engines. And the French were going, yes, these are the best engines we can produce. And the Polish then went to Britain and went, can you produce decent engines? And Britain went, yeah. Oh, you bought French. We apologize. Come here, come here. Let us show you the people that are called vicars. Hello, what would you like to build? We'd like a mean destroyer. You have come to the right place. Let us discuss this. How mean a destroyer would you like? We'd like it to eat its enemies for breakfast. Ah. And use their propeller blades to clean its gunwales after tea. Oh, we can build one like that. And yeah, Borean was a sort of fleet destroyer and was quite a capable ship. But again, it's in the nicest way. Once you're basically taking a British ship over, you're buying into the British doctrine of ship construction and destroyer construction and what their roles are. That's it. Are the JK&N class fleet or utility destroyers? If we're using the very simple utility fleet or war emergency, we'd call them fleet. But there is a adaptation. Hello, Cody. Hello. Thank you for being a member for 3 months. Evening, Doc. Since we're talking about what interwar destroyers, where's the line between destroyers and scout cruiser? Unless you already covered it. Basically, the line between it is about 3,500 tons. No, destroyers aren't supposed to be more than 2,000 tons. Anything bigger than that is pretty much going into scout cruiser territory. So, now, here is the Royal Navy destroyers. And I have put up there a Legion of Hasty Javelins. HMS Legion, HMS Hasty, HMS Javelin. Now that is Legion trying to help out Ark Royal. Hasty, of course, is one of the H class, which are famous for the Second Battle of Narvik. First one is the Germans versus the Norwegians. Second one's when the H class shows up. Third one's when the Royal Navy chucks in the Trevor class and everything, including the kitchen sink that is known as Warspite. Javelin, of course, is one of the after tribal larger fleet destroyers. And you have to remember, you have these are sort of the pre-tribal utility destroyers, which are supposed to do fleet work. But then the Royal Navy builds the tribal class destroyer, tests them out, goes, we actually like the bigger destroyers. They try to build the small destroyers again, and they go, nope, they don't match up. And then they start going, right, and we're going to build big destroyers again. And they're going to be big and sexy. And that is what they do. And that's where the J class, the K class, that's where the J's, the K, the J's, the N's, and all those sort of later vessels come from. They're basically, the Royal Navy builds the tribals, then tries to return to sort of this doctrine and goes, yeah, no, they're not doing what we need them to do. And there is a reason for this. This is the treaty period when the Royal Navy is trying to churn out as many destroyers as it can that can do as many jobs as it can. They have to be good for the torpedo horde. They have to be good for the anti-torpedo horde. They have to be good for escorting convoys. They have to be good for escorting capital ships and carriers. They have to be good across the board. The Royal Navy can't afford to have a destroyer which is weak in any of those roles. But what they learn very quickly is that what's going to be strong enough in the early 1930s for those roles is not strong enough by the late 1930s in those roles. You need more firepower. You need more guns for your escort and your AA defense, for your anti-surface and your AA defense. You need more guns. You need more torpedoes. And this is a problem for the tribals. They exchange guns for torpedoes, which does make them strong in some regards, because it means it's very quick and easy to upgrade them to having 4-inch, a double 4-inch, as replacing X mount instead of having to, and they don't have to drop torpedoes and change any configurations after or anything like that. Whereas for the other destroyers, well, some of them have to lose a whole torpedo system to get the 4-inch guns in for the high-angle anti-aircraft once they realize that, hang on, aircraft are going to, not only these aircraft going to consider destroyers worthy targets, they're coming in as dive bombers. And what's really annoying for the Royal Navy is they've been predicting that for quite a lot of time, but there have been various issues with not with the RAF, with the Air Ministry. And I try and separate them off as much as possible, because you have to remember the Air Ministry is the political ministry side of the Air Force. The Air Force are often it gets grouped together, and people say you're being anti-RAF, or the RAF weren't that bad, and look at them, they all died, and they worked so hard in World War II and all these things. That's all true. It's not the issue. The issue in when you're dealing with the development of fleet aviation protection and fleet operator doctrine against aircraft in the interwar years leading up to World War II is not the RAF and it's not the Royal Navy. It's the relationship between the Admiralty and the Air Ministry. And the fact is, the Air Ministry perceive the Admiralty as competitors for their budget. And that is how they approach it. Now, when the Royal Navy gets control of the Fleet Air Arm, not only get they control the Fleet Air Arm, and this is in 1937 to 1939, it's a transition period. They also get control of development of aircraft. They get things like aircraft sites they can suddenly order, etc., and all these things for dive bombing, which is why they develop the Skua. Skua comes into service, and they quickly realize the problem. Okay, they do an exercise. They do manage to do a quick exercise. They do start to realize the problem, and they're actually working on a solution before war breaks out. But war breaks out, and they have to rush a solution. And the thing is, the solution they'd already been working on for quite a period was going to be the 4.5-inch gun, which was going to be a true general-purpose weapon. But the 4.5-inch upper deck mount, or light mount, which is supposed to be for destroyers and those sort of, and probably C-class cruisers as well, wasn't ready. It wasn't ready in time, and it doesn't come into service till actually well after World War II in the Daring class, because they're putting so much effort in developing the other 4.5-inch and making the 5.25 work and trying to get the 4-inch and 4.7-inch work as well as they can. The 4.5 just keeps getting pushed to one side and pushed to one side. But it's another of those scenarios that if war hadn't lasted till had not happened before 1942, the Royal Navy destroyer force you'd have been dealing with would have been very different, because the odds are, I myself reckon that 2 years of peacetime development, they'd have had the 4.5-inch upper deck mount, which means they'd have started retrofitting that to ships, probably starting with the tribals and larger destroyers in about 1941, early 42, which means if war kicks off in September 1942, you probably still have a large number of Royal Navy destroyers having the 4.5-inch gun. And they probably have some of these ships as well. And remember, it's far easier to fit in a 4.5-inch when you've already designed the ships for 4.7, because, let's be honest, everything's designed for a slightly bigger shell than what they're going to be dealing with. So it fits. And that would have tremendously changed our appreciation of the Royal Navy's fleet destroyers and their destroyer formation, because they'd have had this truly general-purpose weapon system. But they don't. So what you have to look at is you have to look at the RN as, right then, you have surface engagement / long range, low to medium angle, anti-aircraft general purpose guns. So that's what the 4.7-inch really does. High angle, you have 4-inch, which can also be used for engaging torpedo boats, a very, very nasty thing for torpedo boats due to their rapid firing, and 40mm. And you have torpedoes. Now, the Royal Navy puts in a premium on torpedoes when they're building these vessels, because the torpedo is the big killing thing. But then they build the tribals. Why do they build the tribals? To make sure the torpedo boats can get there. Because the Royal Navy is looking at a night doctrine. And the whole idea for the night attack, and this is actually a really sneaky bit of doctrine, is that tribals will come in and they will illuminate the enemy by fire. And by that, what I mean is they will literally be plastering them in 4.7-inch shells, which will hopefully be blowing up when they hit the targets. When they blow up, they won't probably do as much damage to an enemy battleship or an enemy heavy cruiser, an enemy light cruiser. Well, you saw what happened at Cape Bon. But those sort of scenarios, they'll light them up with the shells. And that also can be used to sort of distract people on the bridges and expose positions, which is not a nice thing for experience. But what those shells also do is them going off gives the people sighting the torpedoes on the utility destroyers a target to aim their torpedoes at. They start to get bearing information from where those guns are going off. So they wouldn't be firing their guns. Then they'd fire their torpedoes. Their torpedoes take off. Now, here is the interesting thing. Depending on what kind of fleet you're dealing with, you either at that point all start making smoke and pull off, or if you are attacking a merchant convoy and you have just fired the torpedoes at their heavy escort, you then charge into the center of the merchant convoy with your guns blazing. So The major escort is now dealing with a swarm of torpedoes coming their way. They're not going to be thinking about, oh god, they're getting into the merchant convoy. They're going to be thinking, I've got to dodge a torpedo swarm. Yikes! That's the idea, and you're going to use that time to actually engage. Interesting thing, the British actually get to carry this out. It's carried out by Force K during the Mediterranean, and they actually carry out operations based on that. But usually they are 2 Arethusa class light cruisers and a couple of tribals, or they are some tribals and some J class destroyers. That's what usually ends up carrying over. So it's not actually the big destroyer horde that you would think it as, because these vessels aren't there. But they do carry out a variation of that doctrine. As I see, also considering the general state of Soviet Navy in the Baltic, I'd say those 4 DDs could have at least had local superiority over any light Soviet force. It would have been hard but doable. For the Polish, yeah. To an extent, yeah. If we just go back to them, they would have been quite capable versus their Russian counterparts, which mostly been Razmundi equivalent vessels, which would have been there sort of in any numbers. I think myself they would have needed a few more for dealing with the Russians or the Russians grew. John Shea, when Vickers is asked to build the destroyer, yeah. John, also, in case of training, in September 29, there was a night contact between Wiltshire, who sighted but didn't shoot, and German units. I don't remember if it was September 29th. I don't remember if it was only destroyers. Probably. No, second. Javelin frankly got lucky. There is nothing wrong with a ship getting lucky. That's pretty much most of the Royal Navy's destroy. Let's be honest. There is HMS Afridi as a good example of ships getting lucky. There is Eskimo. How many ships lose that many bows? That's luck. They still come back. And those general purpose 4.5-inch guns are gone all the World War I era capital ships. To an extent, but those are the 4.5-inch guns that go on the general are usually the capital ship, the between deck BD version, which is again what's fitted with the battle class destroyers. They're to illuminate them with brief explosions, or would they use illumination rounds to put a couple of flares overhead? Nope, they're the explosions. Basically, the idea is that the explosions will start fires on their decks. That's the idea. Use the 4.7s to start some fires on the ships by basically bashing away to them. VCH white phosphorus? You would never. Are you suggesting the Royal Navy would use white phosphorus? There seems to be some sort of. Let's put it this way. I have a sneaking suspicion that there are various specialist rounds around, being considered for that option, but they never really seem to actually use them. But mainly they use explosive rounds. There is also the option that they might have actually fired an illumination round straight up the ship. That, again, wouldn't surprise me. Firing an illumination round straight at an enemy ship and just firing the light at the ship. Yeah. Yeah. This is the Royal Navy we're talking about. They do tend to adapt their doctrine. Oh, yeah. Alright, so. But the thing is, now, the Canadian Navy and the Australian Navy are both ordering tribals prior to World War II. They're sort of both in the process. And the Royal Navy, of course, has tribals. Why are tribals useful? Well, as I said, there are three roles three wartime roles they have and one peacetime role. Peacetime role, they jump up presence and provide presence, kind of like a cruiser, and fit in that role. Wartime, they do scouting, so they're able to go and operate independently. They've manned the A, which is including providing ships for the A to K line, which is the scout line for the battle fleet and fleet force. Protect capital ships from other destroyers, and critical for that. And as I've mentioned before, provide the firing point for ships for destroyer forces going into battle. I.e., they're the ones to protect the destroyers when they're going in. They provide the base of fire, which protects destroyers and allows them to get into range to launch their torpedoes, or to illuminate the targets at night by the reconnaissance by fire methodology. The point is, for the Canadians and the Australians, these ships make a lot of sense because they fit in with the doctrine they need. They need ships to protect. They need ships which can step up into the cruiser role because they can't crew as many cruisers. They need ships which are easy to support, and they need ships which will maximize the capabilities of their existing destroyer flotillas. They also need ships which can do reconnaissance, patrols, presence missions. To destroy, for them, the tribal class destroyers fits their requirement to a T. And this is the point about the Royal Navy and its doctrine. The Royal Navy's doctrine has to be sensible to cover the entire empire, because part of the reason for the Royal Navy's existence is to make that empire possible. If it doesn't have a doctrine which is suitable and flexible enough to adapt to the various constituents of that empire, they will start considering that the Royal Navy is not going to protect them. So this is sort of part of that treaty alliance scenario which affects your doctrine, which is another point where the tribals come in. They fit that niche very nicely for the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy. The Royal Canadian Navy's pre-war destroyers, well, they're mainly Skeena. They have a few pre-war destroyers. They're really there is the poor commander of the Royal Canadian Navy basically spends half his life declaring we need more destroyers and trying to get the Canadian government on side for it. And the pre-war one basically gets fired because they don't have enough destroyers when war breaks out, and he's basically sitting there going, "But I told you, in triplicate. What did you expect me to do? Take an ice hockey stick, whack you round the head until all you could say was destroyer? You know, what am I supposed to do, man?" But so they end up with a very destroyer-focused navy. And the destroyers they focus around are about their escort mission and their surface combat mission. In many ways, the Canadian Navy is the biggest example of a destroyer navy in World War II. They rise to being the third largest navy in the world after the Royal Navy and the US Navy in World War II. I know the US Navy overtakes the Royal Navy later, but in World War II, the Royal Navy is still slightly bigger on tonnage. And the point is, the thing is, the Canadian Navy rises to be the third largest in the world. They've got a couple of cruisers and a couple of aircraft carriers. I think only one actually in service before World War II ends, and a few escort carriers. All the rest of their navy is destroyers, corvettes, and frigates. Destroyers, corvettes, and frigates. Destroyers, corvettes, and frigates. And really, the big ships of the Canadian Navy, the big ships which really matter, are their tribal class destroyers. They are the big ships which their navy forms around. They are critical to the esprit de corps that develops in the Royal Canadian Navy. Especially what the Canadian ships get up to in the 10th Destroyer Flotilla ricochets through the Royal Canadian Navy in terms of providing them with a sort of offensive spirit. It's not just a case of we are not just an offensive navy escorting convoys. We are an offensive war-fighting navy. We are a navy. And they are an important part of their doctrine. Their doctrine is very British. It's very, very British, but it's the British variation of the British doctrine which has been developed for Canada and for Australia. It's what are you going to provide in a wartime? Well, you're going to provide cruisers if you're Australia, but you need to also have some presence ships, some ships to your defence and flotilla defence and security, and that is what their tribals are for. For the Canadians, you're going to provide the escort force, and if you're going to be escort forces, you need ships which are going to lead those escort groups and protect those escort groups should a surface radar appear. And that is your tribal class destroyer. That is what a tribal class destroyer. In the nicest way, tribal class destroyers are. Remember what I said earlier when we were talking about defense scenarios. You have things which are critical skills, which you build redundancy into your system for. Okay. And then you have things which are likely exposed, which are likely to get sunk. So you build redundancy for them to replace them, and you have critical things which you have to build redundancy for to replace them, in terms of supremacy. And then you have lots of things which are important, and you have to build something general purpose which can sort of cover all those roles, because you need some redundancy for them. That is what a tribal class destroyer is. It's redundancy for all those important roles. It's not capital ship fill-in. It's not a carrier fill-in. It's not there to replace a Dido. It's not there to replace an Aerofuser. It's there to be able to cover their roles to an extent. And that is what it does very, very well. But you don't need that role in the US Navy for that sort of scenario. You don't need something to fit that position. You don't need something to fit that position in the German Navy. You don't need that in position filled in the Italian Navy. They don't have navies which require that structure or require that sort of they don't have that sort of geostrategic commitments and scenario, which means they require a ship to fit that structure in that way, and that is what the tribals do. Such rounds, if they actually hit, will make fires near impossible to put out. Yeah. Dan Prim, I mean, firing an illumination round. You shot at me. Well, I was trying to make you line up so I could then shoot you more. Yeah. That's it. So how many of the 32 tribal class destroyers were the RN, RCN, and RAN supposed to get? The RN were going to get 16. It got 16. The RCN were supposed to get 8, and the RAN were supposed to get 8. Those got adjusted to 12 and 4, with the RAN building 4. Trying to RAN and RCN also building some at home. Sure, I could see an RN ship putting a starlight shell into the enemy bridge. That would, that would be very helpful for the enemy. That's basically being assisting, because we're making sure the enemy can see what they're doing by putting a starlight shell into their bridge. And you have to consider that as part of 10th Flotilla, the RCN do some absolutely amazing things. They are a really, really hardcore, capable navy. And some of the actions we've already covered, the Battle of Ushant or Ile de Basse, the 9th of June event, 9th to 10th of June. That in that point, the Canadian ships are absolutely critical. They are what happens to ZH1. They're critical for what they do in their operations. They are some of the best ship destroyers in the entire channel are those Canadian tribal class destroyers. They cannot be overstated how capable and how important they were to D-Day. Because if you do not have that 10th flotilla and that securing, let's put it this way. You can deal with the enemy ships as long as they're away from the invasion flotillas. But the moment they're in invasion flotilla, you have so many things you have to protect going around that you have to be worried about hitting yourself. You have to hold fire until you're absolutely certain. Whereas they will be surrounded by targets and able to engage. You cannot overstate what would have happened if that Destroyer flotilla had managed to get into the D-Day, into the sort of the convoys. Even at that point, on D-Day +3, that would have caused absolute devastation. It would have caused the loss of thousands, if not tens of thousands, possibly even 100,000 lives. Especially once you consider the second and third order effects. Because it wouldn't just be the people killed, which would be devastating enough. It would be the supplies which they would take down. It would be the logistical disruption at critical points during the land campaign as the beach and the beachhead area was firmed up. We could all think about operations going on at that point in D-Day in Normandy and what would have happened if there had been a massive drop in supplies. So, yeah, we cannot overstate what 10th Flotilla then. And it's one of the more forgotten actions of World War II, and it really shouldn't be. So, now, if you're in an Australian destroyer, you should not call yourself a tin can sailor. You should call yourself a scrap iron sailor. And the reason is because when the Australian destroyers turned up in the Mediterranean to assist the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean, the lovely German propaganda described them as a scrap iron flotilla. In true Australian fashion, they then restarted, whenever they actually took out enemy ships, started referring to them as another one for scrap iron. And that is pretty much how they approached things. The Royal Australian Navy's doctrine for destroyers in World War II was, we have torpedoes and guns, where are the enemy? They are possibly the single most aggressive destroyer force ever put into combat. And this is saying something for a war which included the Royal Canadian Navy's Tribal class destroyers, the Polish Navy, and the British Tribal class destroyers, and the Fletchers of the US Navy. Considering the level of aggression and combat assertiveness that all those groups offered, saying that this force is possibly one of the most aggressive destroyer force in the world during World War II is saying quite a lot. And yet I'm very, very firm that if I was going to pick the destroyers, and often I wonder if their aggression is so much that that's why the Royal Navy doesn't supply them any tribal destroyers, that makes them build their own. I'm not saying it is the case, but they are certainly very, very aggressive. Very, very aggressive. And I do like this lovely stained glass window. It's rather cool. It's certainly something, again, which, if we get to visit Australia in 2023, that is, I'll be hunting that down. I think that's Australia. Yeah. That's in the Garden Island Naval Chapel in Sydney. And the scrap iron flotilla are the vessels on the top. All their destroyers from World War II. You have their tribals, are the three in the middle, sort of that side. Yeah, you have all their ships. You have the O-class ship destroyers, and you have their ends at the bottom. And all their battle honours. Nesta, Nizam, Napier, Norman, Nepal, Quitmatch, and Quiberon. Oh, they're not O's, they're Q's, aren't they? I always call them O's for some reason. The Tribals, Arunta, Warramunga, and Batan. And the Scrap Irons, Voyager, Vampire, Stuart, Vendetta, and Wadron. Waterhen. Yeah. They are an interesting group, and they are incredibly aggressive. Considering they are mostly World War I era ships, you can understand why they're being called the Scrap Iron. But yeah, they really do not understand the concept of at all. We are supposed to not be on the front line and not be charging straight at the enemy. That's just not in their at all lexicon. They're very good ships. And again, it's destroy actions, but it's one of the realities of it. The problems you have for Australia is, again, and this is the problem which is a legacy of the treaty system. It said there hasn't been a rolling construction. If you'd had rolling construction for, and the British have to an extent had rolling destroyer construction, but not enough. I'm sort of going to start talking about the various treaties, and I'm working out the treaty list and what would we be talking about. I have to admit, I have the treaty series in front of me, the dates of the various things, and basically I've divided into Washington and the first London treaty. I've worked out when the dates of things are going to be and when I'm going to be doing them. And my idea is hopefully to have the London Treaty stuff done so that comes out while I'm in Canada. So you get the London Treaty long patrols while I'm in Canada. But the Washington Treaty ones are mostly going to come out sort of at periods during this time coming up. Yeah. Basically, the Washington Treaty is divided into 4. Right then, so US Navy, once again saved by Sims. You might notice something about these destroyers. They all look fairly similar, and I realise that one of them is a Fletcher design. But they start off with the Sims. And basically, thank the Lord, the US Navy comes up with the Sims class destroyers, because the Sims class destroyers form the basis of what becomes the US Navy's standard destroyer shape. And then they iterate upon that until they have the very good destroyers which come. It starts off with the Sims class, and they are built between 1937 and 1940. Commissioned and served 1939 and 1946. After them, come the Benson class, which, do pretty darn well. And then come the Gleaves class, which is this one. Basically, it goes Sims, Benson over there, Gleaves, and then Fletcher. And finally come the Fletchers. And so the Sims, there are 12 built. The Bensons, there are 30 built. The Gleaves, there are 66 built. The Fletchers, there are 175 built, 13 cancelled. So that means they were basically planning on building 188. And after that, of course, come the Sumners, which are another sort of 70. But the Sumners are the next level up. And they're good ships. There's nothing I'm going to disagree with about the Sumner. But if it wasn't for the Sims, which produces this very good general purpose, what I would call fleet level escort destroyer in time for World War II, and is what the US Navy then surge out. And everything's based on pretty much the same thing. The Sims have 5 5-inch guns, 127mm 38 caliber guns, and carry 12 21-inch torpedoes in 3 quadruple mounts on the centerline when they're designed. The Benson class, designed with 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, that's 2 quintuple launchers, but again 5 5-inch guns. Greaves, 5 5-inch guns, 10 21-inch torpedo tubes in 2 quintuple launchers. The Fletchers, well, goodness gracious me, they come in so many different shapes and sizes, it's hard to say. But one of the constants is 5 dual-purpose 5-inch guns. Usually 10 21-inch torpedoes in quintuple mounts, midshipments. Now, you can turn around and go to me, well, hang on, the Sims, they had 12 21-inch torpedoes. Yeah, in 3 quadruple launchers. Yeah. Because they realized they needed 10 torpedoes, and they didn't have a working quintuple launcher, so they went with 3 quads. But the moment they had a quintuple that worked, they shanted away, went on with it, and went, right, and we can deal with two less torpedoes. But let's be honest, there are probably a few destroyer commanders who would have gone, I wouldn't have minded having the 2 extra torpedoes. You can see how important the Sims class were from the fact of how much they were used and how many of them were lost in World War II because they were used and when they were lost. But also the fact most of them are sunk by, and in fact more of them are probably sunk by Operation Crossroads than anything else. So there's 2, 4 which go to Operation Crossroads, which is just cruel. I find it quite sad that none of these are preserved, because I think the Sims would have been a good class to preserve. They're built by Bath Iron Works, the Federal Shipbuilding of Kearney in New Jersey, Newport News, Boston Navy Yard, Norfolk Navy Yard, Charleston Navy Yard, Norfolk Navy, and Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. And in many ways, they are the experience of building destroyers, which then gets grown. And this is the point I make about the US Navy. They are preparing for war. But they're not. It's strange. The Bensons, the Sims are ordered from 1936-37 onwards in their construction. The Bensons are ordered sort of 37, built from 38 onwards. The Gleaves are ordered in 37-38. They're basically ordered straight after the Bensons, almost at the same time as the more improved version. And then come the Fletchers, which are ordered almost 1940, built on the experience of the previous 3 classes, and they're starting being built in 1941. And that's the point. The US Navy wasn't, as I've said before, wasn't ready for war when war began in World War II, because, arguably, you can see they weren't ready because they just ordered their Fletcher-class horde. They knew what they needed. They knew they didn't have enough destroyers. They just ordered a horde of Fletchers. They already had under production in 1941 the vast majority of 66 odd Gleaves and some of the Bensons, which is another 30 ships. So they had 96. They had the vast majority of 96 ships on order already in 1941 when they ordered the Fletcher Horde. They are basically trying to replace their entire destroyer force as quickly as they can with the most modern ships they can, because they know what they need, and they need a aggressive but general purpose fleet escort. These ships were supposed to do destroyer duty, but they were also supposed to deal with Japanese destroyers. Basically, they are supposed to do pretty much everything. And I would say their nearest equivalent in sort of role and purpose is the JKN classes of the Royal Navy. I'd say that's literally what you're looking at. I see the USN eliminated Scuddle's portholes as part of the design progression from Sims of Lectures. Van Him, if you insist on those 2 extra torpedoes, you can't fit as many 24mm guns. True. And you do want a lot of DACA. The US Navy doctrine for destroyers is an interesting one. I would argue prior to the Sims, they were thinking more about destroyers being offensive tools, but not thinking really as much about them being defensive tools. Once they get to the Sims, they start realizing they need to have them as do the defensive role as well. And unlike the Italians, they have enough industry, enough power to really bump it up. They are good ships. Do I want to comment on the Frams? And what I will say is that there are one of the things I find interesting about the US Navy is they have so many interesting designs of destroyers going on before that. There are some very interesting vessels. Yeah. Honestly, some of some of the American destroyers which they're building in the early to mid 1930s are interesting. They're getting there, but honestly, it's when you get to the Sims you start standardizing on what is a very capable design. And the earlier destroyers are good for gaining experience. They fight hard, but they all have little sort of issues with them. It's for example, if we get the Bagleys, they have 16 21-inch torpedoes in 4 quadruple launchers, 4 5-inch guns, And you sit there and go, if you are carrying 16 torpedoes, which is a nice amount, yeah. You're basically a torpedo ship. That is your job. That is your role. So you're basically an offensive tool. Because do you want to use a ship with that many torpedoes in a defensive role? Because if it gets hit defending you, any of those torpedoes could go sky high and take the whole ship with it. And that's the other problem when you carry as many torpedoes as 16. Even when you're carrying 12, you're pushing it. 10 in 2 quintuple launchers, that's condensing down deck space. That's still a lot of firepower. That's still a lot of potential explosions. But that's almost in a way safer than having quite as much deck space covered by 3 quadruple launchers or 4 quadruple launchers. Because that is a lot of deck space covered by things which can go boom if they get hit by an enemy 5-inch shell. So basically, when you're carrying a lot of torpedoes like that, you're an offensive tool. You're an offensive machine. And that's fine. That is the doctrine for what the US Navy is going for, but this means that the US Navy is going to be short in terms of defensive firepower for defending against, well, let's be honest, the Japanese torpedo horde. Then, how were these USN destroyers at airsdod against someone like the U-boat? You have to remember the US Navy's developing what will eventually become sonar. They're working on it just as the British are working on Aztec. The British Aztec is slightly in advance of the US Navy one, but the US Navy, of course, doesn't come into war as soon as the British do, so they have more time to refine it. One of the things you have to remember the Royal Navy is that really, whilst the destroyers are used a lot for anti-submarine warfare, it's the sloops which take the lead in developing it. The US Navy doesn't really have the sloops and concept for it, because that's more those roles which the Royal Navy built sloops for are mostly covered by the United States Coast Guard. So the US Navy does have some anti-submarine warfare specialists rising in their ranks, and they do some really interesting force. But they don't get paid that much attention to. Honestly, the ASW teams... How do I put this? Okay. The USN's ego when it comes to fighting the Japanese is astronomical. It really is. And there are many sensible voices going, we need to pay attention to this. This is not sensible. This is not what you should be doing. And... well, yeah. The US Navy's approach... For example, the US Navy would constantly think that, the Japanese Navy should improve themselves by getting Germans to help their battleship design. Don't take this the wrong way, but again, the Japanese battleships are light years ahead of their German equivalents in terms of efficiency and capability design. We know this now, historically, but prior to war and even during the war, that's what the Americans fought. The Americans thought the Japanese needed help with their torpedoes. The one areas the Japanese probably did need help with were in AA guns. And honestly, this is another thing which could have been solved pre-war if they bought the patents and machines. Again, it's one of those things. What is the point of having an alliance and even having a growing friendship with Germany and Italy in the 1930s if you don't use it to get a synthetic petroleum plant, a synthetic oil, production facility that can allow you to produce oil from coal, and if you don't use it to get your hands on some decent AA weapons. The 88mm would have been a massive improvement on the Japanese equivalent. And the 40mm Bofors would have been a good thing to go for. But they didn't. Again, that's because the Japanese own ego on these things. I would never presume that the only people who suffer from ego are America and Britain and Germany. They don't know. Ego is something which is universal across the human race. Everyone has an ego. So anyway, what would my 120 quad 21-inch torpedo battleships be? Sunk by anyone with an 18-inch gun. No, they would be pretty darn scary at night. They'd be the sort of thing you could go into with a huge amount of. You could certainly wander into an enemy fleet and basically fire off a huge amount of torpedoes everywhere. And with the new draft slider, it now has as much freeboard as the DD. I haven't got the draft slider on my version yet, but I haven't downloaded the new beta. I've just got the version I've got. They haven't updated it. Now, I have to say, this is one of the reasons why I wrote my book as I did. I know I get people talking, some of the critiques and some of the stuff I sort of talk it through, and I mentioned this build a few times. A number of people have mentioned it, gone, but it's not a class history. And it's not. It's a concept history. It's a strategic history. It's a history of why you're building these ships as they are and what they're going to do. And that's one of the reasons it's written as it is and shaped as it is. But the thing is, the concepts matter. What are they being built for? If we go back to, well, it's also probably easier to skip forward. Yeah, the mission parameters. What are your missions? The US Navy doesn't have to worry about convoys from the same perspective as the Royal Navy, but they do have to worry about protecting their fleet. That's their overriding mission. Let's be honest. If you are going to take a fleet from one side of the Pacific to the other and escort its logistics train and support it and supply it, you're going to need a lot of good all-round destroyers. They're the only thing which has the firepower to stand up to larger ships that you can build in sufficient numbers. Yes, the US Navy will produce a huge number of destroyer escorts and all sorts of things. Yes, they will. But the thing is, their ethos, their entire philosophy revolves around depending upon those destroyers. As much as they may like it or not like it, that's what they're doing. That's what they're going to depend upon. Because that is what the mission parameters require. I say 88mm would have been obsolete in the face of Helldivers and Avengers. The thing is, I think the Japanese could have improved them, but leave that to one side, because the Japanese actually come with some very good mounts, but they don't have necessarily the guns with the right profile for the job they're being required to do. And that's the thing. If you combine the Japanese mounts, I think, with some of the 88s, you have a very good system. But it wouldn't just be the 88s, you also need 40mm, hence I added on the Bofors. That's what you say. Sweden's neutral. Use it. Get the 40mm off them, especially in the 1930s. So, you need this. You need to have a strategy for why and how you're going to use these ships. You need to have a thought process of why you and how you're going to use these ships. And you need to think it through. Overall, the doctrines for the navies do reflect, to an extent, their experience of World War One. Sometimes they reflect, as in the case of the Italians, their experience of World War One over and above their actual needs. Because they forget the Adriatic is a very small scenario versus the Mediterranean. And the wider Mediterranean is going to require a lot more capability built into your ships than fighting in the Adriatic again. So, the British Doctrine, we get to see it in its form as it's implemented. But I honestly think that if they'd had the 4.5-inch gun, then you would see a more complete version of the Doctrine actually capable, and an actual review of its capabilities. But there again, the real test of any Doctrine is the ability to be implemented with the capabilities you have available rather than the capabilities you wish to have. You go to war with what you have, not what you'd like to have. And you fight battles with what is of that is available, not what is on your paper strength. Vintage Car History, to what extent do you relate to Buzz Lightyear? No comment. I may have been wearing this shirt today whilst I was explaining to some first years the realities of life. But, and I will again go back into this, it's important when evaluating destroyers, in fact any ship, you do not evaluate them against each other as if there's some sort of mythical universal best ship standard. There really isn't. Top trumps is the worst form of ship analysis you can find. For someone who enjoys UAD and World of Warships and all these games as much as I do, the reality is, I will admit this, those are not realistic military scenarios. In UAD, you've probably heard me in many videos say, well, this is the point at which I'd be bugging out in real life, because I've done what I need to do and I'd be bugging out. I wouldn't be carrying on this battle because I'm going to end up getting mullered. I'd use my speed to get away, or something. That is the reality. Those are games. They have a limitation to them. It's the same with Total War. It's the same with any game. They are designed for the battle to take place. They're not designed for the strategic conflict of, well, shall we withdraw from the battle right now and try and get away in good order? We've done enough damage, we can go. We've caused enough trouble, we can go. So they're not realistic in that regard. And this can lead to a false idea and estimation of a ship's strength or reality, capabilities versus reality. Destroyers are sometimes called the maids of all work. They are called the key enablers, all sorts of things. The reality is you either have a good destroyer force which fits your doctrine and your needs, or rather a good destroyer force which fits your needs and has a doctrine which allows them to fulfill that, or you don't. The first requirement is to have a destroyer force. That is the problem for the Kriegsmarine. Throughout World War II, their problem is they do not have enough destroyers. They don't. If we consider the scenario of Hood and Prince of Wales versus Bismarck and Prince Eugen, there should have been escorting destroyers with Bismarck and Prince Eugen to help them get them through. There should have been. The Royal Navy should have been forced to deal with destroyers as well, because that would have added an entire layer of... And honestly, considering if the lucky shot had still happened in that scenario, and the golden shell had still landed on Hood in the position it did, and more and more I do work with him, the more and more I am convinced by Drax's argument, the amount of effort he's put into it. Or rather, that his argument is the best one we have yet of it. To use a traditional historian term, it's the best argument we have yet. That would have probably wiped out and cost Prince of Wales. That would have lost us Prince of Wales probably in that fight. It's the same as if the British destroyers had been there. It's one of those things. Okay, the destroyers we have with us are utility destroyers. They can't keep up with it. If you'd had tribal destroyers or other large destroyers there as part of that flotilla, as part of that force, the odds are Bismarck and Prince Eugen would have been far more hard pressed, and they might not have got the golden shot off because they'd have been dealing with the potential of destroyer torpedoes. Because in the nicest way, that's what would have been ramming down on Bismarck. She'd have been dealing with torpedoes coming in and everything, which would have had to change her maneuvers. And the more your ship is having to maneuver to avoid destroyer torpedoes, the less accurate its firing is going to be. That's a reality. Destroyers are not minnows in a capital ship fight that are going to be swept aside. They are things which capital ships have to remember because of those things, those powerful systems, the torpedoes. They give them a power far larger than themselves. Late in the wartime, when HMS Somali charges a Italian battleship, that is following the doctrine. We see battleship, we charge. We don't let it get to convoy. We don't let it have time to think. We just keep going on and on and on. And the Italian battleship is going, hang on, you're coming at me. And the thing is, the Italian battleship has to react. Yes, if its guns can focus in, its 15-inch guns can focus in, they could theoretically wipe out the destroyer. But the thing is, the destroyer is jigging around. It's moving fast enough and maneuvering at a sort of a pace, and it's such a small enough relative target that they can't use their big guns to focus on it. So they're supposed to be using their secondaries, which means they're having to distract and having to focus their secondaries to deal with that. And it's doing smoke and it's doing everything it can to cause trouble and disrupt them. And that stops them being able to do the attack on the convoy, which has devastated the convoy. That is what destroyers are about. They're about filling in all the gaps. They're about protecting all the gaps. And what gaps you need to fill in and what gaps you need to protect depend on your needs. If you have carriers to protect, if you have capital ships to protect, what's your geographical situation? What kind of seas are you in? What kind of a convoy system are you going to have to run? Do you have a massive maritime empire, maritime trade to protect, or do you just are you a continental power with a navy? All these things can have an impact on what ships you're building, and also on what ships fit you. Oh gosh, but Dr. Clarke is the first year I knew absolutely everything about everything. Oh yeah. In Bichon, in UAD, I have used speed to escape battle, wait out the clock. Yes, but the computer never thinks to do that. If German destroyers are there, Holland calls in Norfolk and Suffolk. Yes, but that again changes the battle. If you have Norfolk and Suffolk there engaging Prince Eugen and helping with the destroyers, then that's going to change the battle, isn't it? But a battleship turret may weigh as much as a destroyer, then when it struggles to move quickly enough to engage the destroyer. Well, there's also the fact is the destroyer's closer. You see, the thing is, if the target is over here, I have to move only slowly to engage. But if the target is here and racing along, I have to move a lot faster. And that's the trouble with the destroyer. Get close. This is why the Royal Navy has the doctrine of getting close. Because you actually make it more difficult to engage the closer you get. So, it's 10 o'clock, after 10 o'clock. So I'm going to say any final questions and then I'm going to finish up to you. And thank you very, very much for being online and watching videos. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the questions. I hope I've answered all your answered your questions, and to your satisfaction. And thank you again for anyone who supports on the supporting on the cameras. It will be nice. It's nice. I've got a message from someone already, but any hints and tips on camera procuring and which one I should be going for, it would be very helpful. And what we've got coming up, we have York, Exeter, and the Canaries class coming next week. So you're going to hear me talking about cut price counties. So there is going to be a lot of sarcasm coming next week. You also have, in terms of lives, we have the Riverine, if not quite maritime, background to the Battle of Shiloh, because I just fancied doing a US Civil War battle. I just fancied it. I've been teaching US Civil War for the last couple of weeks, and I just fancied doing the Battle of Shiloh, so, that fitted in with what I was teaching. And slightly later it's going to be 14th of April, is the RMS Titanic. And the reason that's slightly later is I finished teaching that day. I finished running a center. And theoretically, I should be home in time for that at 6:30, because theoretically, I finish and have left at 5 o'clock. And it should take me about an hour to get home. But I've scheduled it for 7 to give myself more time, just in case. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, Jack Ray. UAD needs to give the AI a sense of self-preservation. Suddenly you go into battle and discover the ships have decided they don't want to fight. That's good. Someone said 31 not a Burke. What was that about? Basically, Arleigh Burke decided that at no point would he go less than full speed, which is not bad doctrine for US Navy Admiral and US Navy Destroyer Commander. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Dana Fadaka. Thank you, Roland Cash. Jonathan Morrow, thank you. Nice agreement. Why do people think the Hood's torpedoes caused her explosion, when in reality the 15-inch mags blowing probably detonated torpedo magazines? There are people who have some very interesting ideas. Vision, I'm now poor. Dentist and new motor car. Ouch! Thank you, Mother62. I'll look at the image on Discord. Oh, God. Do I want to share it? Let's look at it in Discord. I don't have Discord open on the computer while I'm running these lives, because otherwise it uses up too much power on this poor thing. And I do say poor thing. Milne. Okay. Yeah, I've seen variations of that one. I don't need to share it, but yeah, there have been lots of variations of that going around. Thank you, Sage. Thank you, Ian Stradling. It's pay rise day tomorrow. Minimum wage caught up with me again. Yeah. Thank you, Iran Cash. Thank you, VCH. Thank you, Abzowski. Thank you, Dope Squad. Thank you, Concentrados. Thank you, Grosowski. Thank you. Thank you, Enoch. Thank you, everyone. And Ryan. Thank you. I hope you're looking forward to the lives. I'll be advertising. I'll be putting the suggestions for patron topics for April. Will go live tomorrow. And yeah. Next week, lots and lots of sarcasm coming away. Lots and lots of sarcasm. There is me and the Cut Prowse Counties. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thank you. Take care, and thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.